The teacup exploded against the floor about 6 inches from my feet, and my first coherent thought in this brand new body was, wow, rich people really do just throw porcelain at each other. The second thought was that the porcelain was aimed at me. I was standing in a hall the size of a small airport, marble everywhere, incense curling up toward a ceiling I couldn't see the top of, and at the far end, an enormous middle-aged man was rising off his chair like a thundercloud deciding to become a person. He had the kind of face that gets carved into mountains. He was pointing at me, and he was screaming one word over and over in a voice that made the servants along the walls fold in on themselves like paper. Kneel. Kneel down right now, you worthless little. Kneel. Right. Sure. Give me a second, sir, because I am currently very busy dying. See, about 10 seconds ago, subjective time, I had been on an electric scooter in the rain, doing 180 of the most illegal miles per hour a food delivery scooter has ever done, chasing a 5-star rating I was never going to get. Then a Maybach came off the overpass like a wet god falling out of the sky, and there was a sound like the world clearing its throat, and then there was nothing. No tunnel, no light, no grandma waving from a doorway, just a full-color slideshow of somebody else's life getting stapled directly into the back of my skull while a stranger screamed at me to get on my knees. Transmigration. The genuine article. After a decade of reading web novels at 2 in the morning to forget how much I owed, the universe had finally made me the protagonist of one. I just had to survive the first 5 minutes. I did the only thing a man in my position could do. I stood there and let the memories finish downloading, and I smiled because it kept my face busy while my brain caught up. Here is what my brain caught up to. The screaming mountain was Ye Shun, my father, allegedly. One of the 7 kings of the North Sea, an actual living legend, the man who once stood alone against a million invading demons and won, the kind of person people build shrines to without asking permission. Beside him sat a woman in white so elegant she made the incense look sloppy. Su Meilin, my mother, an 8th realm sword immortal, the sort of person who could unmake this entire palace with a wave of her sleeve. And a few steps down from them, arms crossed, chin up, wearing the smug little half-smile of a boy who has never once been told no, stood my younger brother, Ye Hao, the genius, the prodigy, the saint of Immortal Mountain, crowned at 18, the pride of the whole clan, beautiful family, real Hallmark movie, except this body I'd landed in was named Ye Yu, and Ye Yu's memories did not have a single warm one in them, not one. Ye Yu had been dumped on the streets of Liang at 3 years old and raised by a poor old farming couple who fed him when they could and loved him when they could and then died and left him nothing but the instruction to go seek immortality because in this world that was the only exit from the bottom. So he went. He got bullied at the Holy Land for being poor. He learned that the only 2 ways to stop getting hit were to start hitting people weaker than you or to become such a nasty piece of work that hitting you wasn't worth the trouble. And then one day, when he had nothing left, a beautiful young couple walked up to him and said the magic words, "Child, we're your parents." Oh, he cried. The original owner of this body actually cried. 20 years alone, and here they were. And there was a reason for all of it. There was a plan. He wasn't garbage. He was somebody's son. They explained. Border wars. Enemies everywhere. They'd had to hide him for his own protection. 20 years of protection. 20 years where they never once wrote, never once visited, never once checked whether their precious hidden treasure was warm or fed or breathing. And then he met the little brother who had never known a cold night, who had famous teachers and mountains of medicine and 7 bodyguards to open doors for him, who took one look at his gutter-raised older brother and decided in the depths of his little genius heart that this was an embarrassment. That was when the original Ye Yu understood. The protection was the abandonment. There was no difference. And a month of coming home before dawn every single day to bow good morning to parents who couldn't remember he existed had finally broken something in him, and he'd gone to a winehouse called Drunken Dream and drunk himself all the way to the exit, which is where I came in. New tenant. Body still warm. "Are you deaf as well as useless?" Ye Shun's voice cracked the air again. I said, "Kneel and reflect on your behavior. A month of shaming this family with your drinking and your gutter friends and your face. How did I sire something like you?" And there it was. The porcelain. The screaming. The mother saying nothing, absolutely nothing, her cold gaze sliding off me like I was a stain on the good furniture. The brother watching with that little smile. Servants trembling. 100 years of guarding the border, they said, and not one of them had ever bothered to guard a 3-year-old. I want to be clear about my emotional state at this exact moment because it matters for everything that comes after. I was not sad. The original owner had already done all the crying this body had in it, and he'd taken the sadness with him wherever the sad ones go. What was left was me, and what I felt, standing in that beautiful cold room being told to get on my knees, was a kind of bright, clean anger, the kind you can warm your hands on. 20 years, and the first thing they wanted from me was my knees. Cool. Very cool. Love that for me. I was still deciding exactly how to ruin their afternoon when a voice that was not the mountain and not the ice queen spoke up inside my skull, crisp and cheerful and completely uninvited. System activating. Activation successful. Entering life selection screen, please wait. I nearly laughed out loud right there in front of the great Ye Shun. A system. An actual system. You wait your whole life, 2 whole lives, and it shows up 30 seconds before you were going to try your luck fistfighting a 9-realm king, which is the exact worst moment, which somehow made it perfect. Cutting it a little close, buddy? I told it. Another minute and I'd have gone up there swinging on principle. Beginning life choices. 3 lines of light unrolled across the inside of my eyes, and I stopped listening to Ye Shun entirely, which I recommend to everyone. Option 1. Apologize to your father. Explain yourself. Earn his understanding. Turn over a new leaf. Unlock the life of the child other parents talk about. Obtain the supreme body. Not bad actually. Master anything instantly. Cultivation through the roof. Become the family's pride. Small print though. The small print on that one was that I'd have to spend the rest of forever being their good, obedient boy, nodding along, coming home before dawn to bow. Option 2. Endure in silence. Bear everything. Never fight back. Never retaliate. Unlock the life of the turtle. You are the most patient coward in the world. Obtain the indestructible body. Why are you swearing at me, system? In my last life, I ate 1,000 one-star reviews for a few coins a plate. I changed accounts and started over more times than I can count so I could keep eating garbage from strangers with a smile. You want me to do that for eternity? Close the tab. Next. Option 3. A true man stands between heaven and earth. Why crawl? Sever ties with your parents here and now. Unlock the ultimate Devil King life. Obtain the Bloodthirsty Demon God talent. I sat with that one for exactly as long as it took Ye Shun to draw his next breath. Look, I'm a reasonable man. 2 lives of being reasonable, and the reasonable read on option 3 was obvious. Ultimate Devil King is not usually the healthy choice, the wise choice, the retire comfortably with a pension choice. That's the option that gets you hunted by righteous heroes for 900 chapters. I knew the genre. I'd read the genre at 2 in the morning for a decade. The Devil King route is where the story puts the people it wants to watch suffer beautifully before the swordsman shows up. But I had also just inherited 20 years of a stranger's memories, and I'd sat through all of them in the last 30 seconds. And in none of them, not one, had reasonableness ever once paid out a single coin. Reasonable got you the streets. Reasonable got you the cold. Reasonable got you a month of walking an hour before dawn to bow at people who couldn't be bothered to learn your face. Reasonable got you a wine house and an early grave and a family that threw a teacup at your feet in front of the servants and called it discipline. The obedient son in option 1 had probably been reasonable his whole life too. Look where the reasonable son got to stand, right here, on this marble, being told to kneel. Some part of me, the part that had eaten 1,000 one-star reviews with a smile, was frankly done taking the safe option and getting billed for it anyway. You ungrateful animal, Ye Shun was saying somewhere far away. I'm sentencing you to a month facing the wall in the ancestral hall, and you won't come out until I choose 3, I told the system. Congratulations. Your choice was successful. You have unlocked the ultimate Devil King life and obtained the Bloodthirsty Demon God talent. A life choice gift pack has been delivered to your inbox. Somewhere behind my eyes, a little package appeared with a bow on it, and I felt the change go through this borrowed body like a match dropped down a well, deep, and then suddenly, everywhere. My blood, which had been ordinary weak trash tear blood a second ago, took a breath. I looked up at Ye Shun, at the man who wanted my knees, at the mother who wanted my silence, at the little brother with the little smile. Reflect, I said, and my own voice came out steady and easy, and I watched the whole room flinch at the sound of it, because this was not how the sad, quiet Ye talked. Reflect on what? On your good name? Does a single person outside these walls even know I'm your son? The teacup was already broken. I figured I might as well break the rest of it. Since you came back, I said, walking the words out slow so everyone could hear them land, have you announced my name to a single soul? Have you told one person in this whole city that the great Ye Shun has an eldest son? No, you saw what I looked like and you decided to wait, temper the boy first, fix him, then once he stopped embarrassing you, then you'd let the world know. Ye Shun's mouth opened, nothing came out. For a man who could stop an army, he was having real trouble stopping me. You keep saying you had no choice, I went on. The border, the enemies, so tragic, but you had a choice for him. I tipped my head at the little brother. Best of everything, every teacher, every pill, every guard. You had 20 years of choices, and every single one of them was him. You bastard! Ye Shun found his voice, and the whole hall shuddered under it. Back then we were holding up the sky so the world wouldn't burn. Do you understand what we carried? I understand you carried a lot of things, I said, just never me. That did it. Not for him, for the little brother. I'd been keeping half an eye on Ye Hao the whole time, because in my experience it's never the loud one who hits you. It's the quiet, proud one standing off to the side, deciding you've insulted his whole existence. And I'd insulted his whole existence. 18 years of being told he was the son, and here was some gutter version of himself refusing to squint. He moved fast, genius fast. 1 second he was by the pillar, and the next his palm was buried in my chest, and the world went white. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. It felt like getting hit by the Maybach again, except slower, so I had time to appreciate it. Something in there cracked. I went off my feet, hit the marble, slid. My mouth filled up with the warm copper taste of a split lip, and that is when I met my new friend for the first time. Because the instant that blood hit my tongue, something in me woke up and inhaled. The bloodthirsty demon god, doing what it does. The pain didn't go away, it turned into fuel. My blood stopped screaming and started boiling, and for one bright dizzy second I felt my strength jump, doubled, tripled, some engine deep in this body kicking over that had never turned before. Interesting, I thought, spitting red onto their nice floor. Very interesting. So that's what the third door bought me. Pain in, power out. Hit me and I get stronger. The universe had handed me a talent with the manners of a cornered animal, and standing there tasting my own blood with something ancient waking up hungry behind my ribs, I understood for the first time that I hadn't been given a gift so much as a debt collection service, one that only paid out when it hurt. Not interesting enough yet. Even with the blood rage humming and doubling through me, I was still a first-realm nobody, and Ye Hao was a second-realm saint who'd been raised from the cradle on a steady diet of miracles and other people's deference, and if he decided right then to finish what he'd started, there was precisely nothing I could do to stop him, so I filed it away. Noted, the talent was real enough to feel, but it was a seed, and seeds don't win fights. Seeds win futures. I just had to live long enough to plant this one somewhere with a lot of blood in the soil, so I did the smart thing, which was get up. I got up off that floor with my chest full of broken glass, and I laughed, because it was that or scream, and I don't scream for these people. There he is, I said. There's the good son. 20 years of the finest cultivation the world can buy, and this is what you built. Look at him. He can crush a street thug in one blow. You must be so proud. Su Meilin made a small sound, her first sound of the entire afternoon. She'd half risen, one hand out toward me, and there were actually tears standing in her eyes, and I want you to understand that this was the part that told me everything. Not the teacup, not the kneeling. This. She reached toward the son, bleeding on the floor with her mouth trembling, and when I looked back at her with the flat, cold eyes of a stranger, she flinched, and her hand went instead to steady the son who'd done the bleeding of others. Every subconscious inch of them faced one boy. It was never me they were reaching for. It never would be. Enough, I said, and something in my voice made even Ye Shun go still. Stop the act. Your eyes don't lie even when your mouths do. From the second I walked in this house, you looked down on me, all of you, and now you want to play the wounded parents? Save it. I'm not the audience for it. You, Ye Shun's face had gone the deep purple of a man whose blood pressure has left the building. What sage taught you to speak to your father like this? Father. I tried the word out and it tasted like nothing. I'm not worthy of being your son, remember? I'm just a street thug. Your family's too big and too bright. Someone like me could never climb up to it. I looked at all three of them, the king and the sword immortal and the saint, this beautiful cold triangle that had never once had room for a fourth point, and I made the decision that the original owner should have made a month ago and couldn't because he still had hope, and hope is the heaviest thing a poor man can carry. That's enough, I said. From today, I have nothing to do with your northern prince's mansion. We're strangers. We'll never see each other again. I nodded at my own broken chest. Consider that blow I just took payment. For 20 years of a roof I never asked you for. Now we're even. And I turned around and walked out, and I did not look back, because looking back is for people who left something behind, and I hadn't left anything in that room but a little of my own red, which frankly improved the decor. Behind me the king was roaring, "Rebel, traitor, let him go. Let's see how far he gets without my protection." And the mother was crying my milk name, you heir, and it rolled off me like rain off a roof. I had a very clear thought as I walked. I have run away from bad situations in 2 entire lifetimes now, and this is the first time it feels less like fleeing and more like being released. Then I nearly walked face first into 3 people coming the other way. 2 old men, sour-faced, and between them a woman. She was, I'll admit it, spectacular. White robes, an aura of frost, the kind of beauty that comes with a warning label, and she looked at me the way you'd look at something you scraped off your shoe. "Get out of my way," she said. Now, I didn't know her yet, not really, but the body knew her, and the body's memory hit me all at once, and it was the worst kind, the toad loves the swan kind. This was Lian Hua, little princess of the Lian family, saintess of Immortal Mountain, prettiest daughter in the whole empire, walks into a room and men forget their own names. She and Ye Hao were the golden couple, childhood sweethearts, the match made in heaven that everyone gushed over. Small problem. The marriage contract, the one their parents signed before any of them were born, wasn't for Ye Hao, it was for me. She'd spent 20 years assuming she was promised to the golden boy, and then she'd found out it was the gutter boy instead, and her whole life had collapsed, and she'd taken it out, every single day of that month, on the gutter boy, the cold looks, the mockery, the pleasure of watching me try to please her and fail. And the original Ye Yu, poor devil, had kept trying anyway, sticking to her like a leech, showering her with concern she wiped off like grease. I looked at her arrogant frozen face, and I felt the old owner's 20 years of swallowed humiliation, and I let it go, because I was done carrying his weight along with mine. Self-righteous, I said, mild as milk, and I stepped around her like she was a puddle. She actually startled. In her whole life, I don't think she'd ever been walked past. She said something. What's wrong with him? What happened to you? And I heard the small crack in the frost of her voice, and I did not slow down, because whatever was wrong with me was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I walked out the gate of the Northern Prince's mansion with a hole in my chest and a devil in my veins and not one single thing to my name, and the wind off the street of Liang hit me like a door opening. World, I thought, get ready, you're about to meet your new king. I really believed it too. That was the funny part. I had a cracked sternum, no money, no cultivation to speak of, and a talent whose entire personality was drink blood, get stronger, and I strolled out into the capital like I owned it. In my defense, I was right. It just took a truly unreasonable amount of blood to get there. Now, I wasn't there for what happened in that hall after I left. I was out on the street getting rained on, but I heard about it later, in pieces, from the one person in that whole palace who'd ever actually been kind to the boy whose body I was wearing, and I'm going to tell it to you because if I'd known I could have watched it live, I'd have sold tickets. After I walked out, Ye Shun did what proud men do when a hole opens under them. He started throwing furniture, kicked over a table, roared for a servant. Ye Wei, this old butler, name of Ye Wei, and remember him, because he's important. Ye Wei comes running, and Ye Shun tells him to go clear out my belongings, throw them away, pretend the family never had a second son. And Ye Wei hesitates, and Ye Shun, still steaming, says, "What are you waiting for?" And Ye Wei, this old man who has been quietly dying inside for years, finally says the thing. "Your Highness, the young master doesn't have a room in the manor." The whole hall goes quiet. Because it turns out the great Ye Shun had, a month ago, casually ordered that the coddling be dialed back on the new boy, temper his character, don't let him get soft and arrogant, and then Ye Shun, busy being a legend, forgot he ever said it, and nobody dared unforget it for him. So for a month, that boy had no room in his own father's house. He walked an hour through the dark from the Holy Land every single morning to arrive before dawn and bow good morning to two people who never looked up. And then he walked an hour back alone after dark, and he never complained. Not once, because he thought if he was just good enough, just patient enough, one day they'd make space for him. They never made space for him. He was a guest in his own family, arrived at dawn, left at dark, slept somewhere else. You want to know why the original owner drank himself to death? That's why. Not the cold. The room that was never there. Su Meilin heard all of that, and something in her broke that never grew back right. She turned on Ye Shun, the Sword Immortal, the Ice Queen, and she slapped her husband across the face in front of the servants and told him he wasn't fit to be a father, and then she turned into a streak of white light and left, went home to her own father's mountain, just like that. So let's tally it up. In one single afternoon, the invincible king of the north, the man who once stood alone against 1,000,000 demons and sent them home, lost his eldest son, lost his wife, and, because the golden boy would soon go running off to his precious trials without a backward glance, lost every warm body in his life except a dozen old guards who were paid to be there. All of it in the space of a few hours over a teacup he threw for effect and a knee he demanded on principle. He sat down on the cold steps of his own palace, alone, in a house full of rooms, and the servants said he seemed to age 10 full years between one breath and the next, the legend draining out of him and leaving just a tired old man on the stairs who couldn't work out where the afternoon had gone. Good, I thought when I heard it. That's a start. That's a down payment. I know how that sounds. I know. Let me get to the part where I'm not a monster, or at least a more entertaining one, because here's what I was actually doing while all that fell apart behind me. I was walking through Liang, this ancient capital where flying ships crossed the sky like it was nothing, this city where the body I wore had spent 20 years, and I felt like a tourist in it, no belonging, no home, same as the palace, same as everywhere. And somewhere in the wandering, I stopped. And I did something I'm not going to make a joke out of. I talked to him, the other one, the one who used to live here. I don't know exactly how it works, the transmigration business, whether he was still in there somewhere, a last thin echo of a boy who tried so hard for so long, or whether I was just talking to the walls. Didn't matter. I said it out loud anyway, standing on some empty street corner in the rain like a crazy person. A man can't live in the shadow of the past, I told him. So say a proper goodbye to it. I already did for you. Rest now. You were so tired. You bent over for 20 years. It's time somebody stood up straight. Leave the rest to me. I'll carry the pain part. You don't have to struggle anymore. And I felt it go. Whatever obsession had been knotted up in this body, the wanting, the hoping, the small starved child still reaching for people who'd never reach back, I felt it let go and drain out of me, and a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the demon god, an ease I hadn't felt in either of my lives. Rest in peace, kid, I said. I've got it from here. Okay, sentiment over. Do not get used to it. Because I still had a hole in my chest and no money and a very interesting new little friend in my blood, and I was standing in the open in a city that had just watched me tell off a 9-realm king. Time to see what the gift pack had for me. System, I said. Open the life choice gift pack, unlocking a life-changing gift package. Congratulations. You have obtained the Supreme Demon Codex, Devouring Heaven Demon Art. Congratulations. You have obtained 1 Weeping Blood Pill. Congratulations. You have obtained the Divine Sword, Tian Shi. Congratulations. You have obtained the Supreme Sword Technique, 1 sword to slay immortals. Congratulations. You have obtained the Supreme Movement Art, Carefree Wind Riding. I stood there in the rain with my jaw somewhere around my knees, because I'd asked for a simple starter system, a little cheat. Nothing greedy, and the universe had handed me a Devil King starter kit with the tag still on. I opened the demon art first, and my whole body lit up crimson, blood roaring, and I braced for the black smoke and the evil laughter and whatever it is demons are supposed to feel like, and instead a wave of pure, upright, righteous energy rolled out of me, the kind of holy Confucian air that scholars spend 100 years trying to cultivate a single wisp of, on a demon art. Wait, I said out loud. System, are you sure? Because I think you gave me the wrong one. This feels extremely law-abiding. The system, cheerful as ever, explained, the Tao doesn't split into good and evil. That's a line people draw in their own heads. A true demon isn't defined by his methods, only by whether he reaches the top. The Devouring Heaven Demon Art wears righteousness like a coat, and underneath it, quietly, it eats. Everything it touches, it drains, and it hands the strength to me. A devil dressed as a saint, sinister on the inside, spotless on the outside. I started to laugh, and this time it was a real one. Oh, I liked this. I liked this a lot. Righteous energy pouring off me while I did the most unspeakable things imaginable. That wasn't a bug. That was the whole business plan. Nobody suspects the guy who glows. I flipped deeper into the codex and found it went on, layer under layer, a bottomless library of the forbidden, sword arts that folded space, movement arts that moved like the dark moves, alchemy, page after page of it, including, I noted, a recipe or two that made my stomach turn over a little, even after 2 full lifetimes of steadily lowering standards. Human blood in the pot, bones ground fine, real executioner stuff, the kind of thing you'd expect to find written on the inside of a prison wall. I kept turning the pages anyway because a tool doesn't stop being a tool just because it's ugly, and I'd been on the wrong end of enough ugly tools to have lost my squeamishness about who was holding them. Good grief, I said to the empty street. And here I thought I was going to be the villain. You're the depraved one. I'm basically a saint next to you. I meant it as a joke. I want that on the record, for later. When I said it, I meant it as a joke. I looked at the weeping blood pill sitting in my palm. This innocent little bead the system's notes said was refined from the blood of a genuinely powerful human being. Eat it, and I might jump whole realms. Somewhere behind me, a 9-realm king was sitting on his steps, aging 10 years. Somewhere out there, a holy land full of people who'd spent 3 years using this body as a punching bag were going about their day, assuming nothing had changed. I closed my hand around the pill. Time to change some things. I found a rundown little pavilion on a cliff edge outside the city, the kind of place nobody goes, and I swallowed the weeping blood pill. I want to describe what a whole realm feels like when it hits you all at once, but the honest version is, imagine every cell you own suddenly deciding it's been slacking off its entire life and getting to work at the same time. My blood boiled. Not the nice warm boiling, the excited, manic kind, like the pill had strapped a rocket to something in my spine. The system's notes had mentioned the pill was refined from a powerful human's blood, and the bloodthirsty demon god read that like a 5-course meal and rang the dinner bell. When the light died down and I could see straight again, I checked myself, and I had gone, in one night, from the 7th rank of the mountain-moving realm, bottom of the barrel, trash tier, the profession's toilet, to the 9th rank of the mountain-shaking realm. 2 full realms, overnight. That's the thing about a cheat with no ceiling. The math just doesn't behave. By dawn, I'd done more than climb. I'd cracked open the movement art, carefree wind riding, all the way to minor mastery, and I'd caught the first stroke of that terrifying sword technique, one sword to slay immortals. A name so arrogant I laughed the first time I read it. Below immortals, I'm invincible. Above immortals, we trade 1 for 1. Who writes that down about a sword? Somebody I very much wanted to be, that's who. My comprehension had gone strange and fast. Scriptures that should have been mud suddenly clear as glass, and I figured out why. The blood rage wasn't just muscle. When it ran, my head ran faster too. So there I was at sunrise, brand new man, stretching in the window like a cat, when someone started banging on my door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Yeah, you! Open up!" "I know you're in there, you little rat. You think you can hide from me? You'll be sorry once I'm inside." Oh, I knew that voice. This body knew that voice the way you know a bad tooth. A specific conditioned dread. A flinch older than thought. Zhang Kai. Second son of the Zhang family of Liang, direct descendant, distinguished background, and for 3 years the personal bane of the original owner's existence. Every month, when he ran short of coin for his drinking and his gambling, he came to Yeyu for a top-up, and if the coin wasn't there, and it usually wasn't because Yeyu earned 2 spirit stones a month and Zhang Kai's habits cost rather more, he took the shortfall out of the boy's hide with interest in front of whoever happened to be watching. A whole ecosystem of casual misery ran through this one smug, well-fed boy, and the body I now wore had funded every bit of it, month after month, year after year, and thanked him for the privilege of being allowed to keep breathing. The banging got louder, the frame jumped in its housing. "I can hear you in there. Don't make me come in and drag you out, it'll go worse for you." I opened the door. Zhang Kai's hand was already swinging, a nice open-palmed slap, the entitled kind you deliver to something you own. In the old days, it would have connected, and Yeyu would have taken it, because Yeyu had no background and no one to call, and the only survival strategy left to the powerless is to fold. I caught it, reached out, wrapped my fingers around his wrist, and stopped it in the air about 2 inches from my cheek. Even I was a little surprised. His hand, coming in fast, looked to me like it was moving through honey. So this was reaction speed. Nice. Zhang Kai was more than a little surprised. He gaped at the hand holding his hand. Then, because some people can only think of one move, he kicked me. I lifted my knee to block, and there was a sound like a bat hitting a steel post, and Zhang Kai folded up howling. "Ow, ow, my leg, it hurts, it hurts." "Was that supposed to work?" I asked him, genuinely curious. He stared up at me from where he was hopping around, clutching his shin, and I watched the math slowly happen behind his eyes. This kid was a second-realm cultivator. Dealing with the old Yeyu had been like handling a chick, and now the chick had caught his slap out of the air and turned his kick into a personal injury. "No," he decided out loud, the way frightened people do. "No. Why would I be scared? He's just a lowly commoner." I have to tell you, 3 years of this body's swallowed rage was standing right behind my teeth, and Zhang Kai kept giving me such good reasons to let it out. "Zhang Kai," I said, and I felt myself smile. "Shouldn't we settle some old accounts? And while we're at it, some new ones?" By now, the racket had pulled disciples out of their rooms to watch, half a dozen faces, then a dozen. Zhang Kai clocked the crowd and did the thing bullies do when they've lost the room. He got louder, puffed his chest, wiped his shin, told everyone I was a nobody, a nothing, an ant he could crush whenever he liked, that the gap between us had been fixed at birth, and no amount of struggling would let me out of my cage. The crowd shifted and muttered. Old grievances, quiet ones, people he'd stepped on for years who now had to watch him do it again. Nobody moved to help me. They'd learned better. That's what a family like the Zhangs buys with all that money. Not love, just the certainty that no one will lift a finger. "You'd better kneel and apologize," Zhang Kai was saying, warming up, "and maybe I'll be in a good mood and spare your—" I let the righteous energy out. I hadn't fully planned it. It just came. That vast, upright Confucian air rolling off me in a wave, and the whole crowd sucked in a breath at once because they knew what it was, even if I barely did. That's heaven and earth righteous Tao," someone whispered. "How is that possible? That's what the great Confucian sages have. How does he—" Zhang Kai's smug little face had gone slack. "Heh," I said. "You always did think you were something." And I slapped him. One slap. 3 years of a good man's stolen coin and swallowed blood went into it, and Zhang Kai went off his feet and flew, genuinely flew, like a kite with the string cut, better than 10 meters, and hit the ground and spat out a tooth and most of his dignity. His whole cheek bloomed up red and swollen like a slapped pork bun, Scream if you want, I told him, walking over. I want to hear it. 3 years you made him beg. Let's hear what you sound like when it's your turn. The crowd was losing its mind. He hit Jiang Kai. He actually hit Jiang Kai. Does he have a death wish? The Jiang family will bury him alive and salt the ground. And underneath the fear, quieter. Something else moving through the younger disciples, the ones who'd been squeezed by that same fat hand, a kind of held breath, disbelieving hope. The look of people watching someone do the thing they'd all privately dreamed of and never dared. Nobody said it out loud. In a place like that, you didn't dare say it out loud. But I could see it, and I filed it away, because a crowd that secretly wants your enemy to fall is a resource, and I was learning to count everything as a resource now, and louder than all of it, over and over, the same 3 words. That's righteous Tao. That's what the Confucian sages have. How. I didn't answer any of them. I reached down, got a grip on the second son of the Jiang family of Liang, and dragged him toward my room. Where do you think you're going? I said, when he started scrabbling. We're just getting reacquainted. You've been collecting from me for 3 years, young Master Jiang. It's finally payday. I hauled him inside and shut the door on the wide, horrified eyes of the crowd. Here's the thing nobody in that hallway understood yet, and honestly, the thing I was only just understanding myself. I hadn't picked endure in silence. I'd had that option in writing from a system with a nice defensive body attached, and I'd closed the tab because I was done being the person the world does things to. From here on, I was going to be the person who does things back. And, occasionally, first. The pain those Jiang boys had put into this body over 3 years wasn't something you fix by walking away, some debts you have to collect in person, and I was in a collecting mood. Here's where I learned what the devouring heaven demon art actually does for a living. I didn't have to do anything dramatic to Jiang Kai. That was the horrifying part. I just kept him close, and the art did the rest, this quiet, patient pull, draining the strength out of him and pouring it into me, so slow he didn't even understand what was happening, just that he was getting weaker and thinner, and I was getting stronger. In a few minutes, I felt myself click up another small realm, righteous energy glowing off me the whole time, holy as a sunrise, while I sat there and ate a man's life like a snack, a devil in a saint's coat. I told you, it's all the essence. Jiang Kai was still cursing me. Kill me if you dare, I'll tear you apart, my brother will end you, when the door came off its hinges. Zhang Han. The elder Zhang brother, third realm, personally recognized heir of the Zhang family's old ancestor, the kind of young master even Holy Land elders bow to. He came through the wall with his sword already out and killing intent pouring off him, and I'll give him this. He was fast, faster than his little brother, fast enough that I had to actually move. You lowly wretch, you dare hurt my brother. Zhang Han, I said, dodging his opening cut. I was just wondering how to come find you, and here you are, delivered. He didn't like that. People with his upbringing never do. He came at me with everything, third realm aura filling the room to the corners, sword flashing in a pattern that had probably cost his family a fortune in instruction, absolutely certain that a first realm gutter rat was about to be carved up and learn his proper place in the order of things, and that certainty is exactly what got him. He wasn't taking me seriously, not for 1 second. I was, and I'd been marinating in the talent's fury and a dead stranger's 20 years of debt for 2 days straight with no outlet. He led with a thrust, meant to pin me to the back wall. I wasn't where the wall was. He followed with a downward cut that would have split me to the collarbone if I'd stood still and let it, which was apparently the only scenario his training had prepared him for. I stepped inside the arc of it, under his arm, close enough to smell the expensive incense on his robes, and I put a single palm into his chest. The terrifying thing was how much force came out of it. It didn't feel like effort, it felt like setting something down. He left his feet, folded around my hand, and went back through the wall he'd just come through, a fresh hole in the plaster right next to the old one. Outside, the crowd screamed, because now they could see straight into the room through 2 ragged gaps. And what they could see was Jiang Kai withered and graying on the floor, and Zhang Han crumpled into the splinters and rubble, and me standing in the middle of it, unhurried, glowing gently like a sunrise, like a saint at morning prayers. Jiang Kai, from the floor, gray and shrinking, still had breath enough to beg his brother to get up and kill me, to make me suffer for this, to peel me. Right to the end, he was giving orders to someone who couldn't follow them, certain the world would rearrange itself for a Zhang the way it always had. So I ended it. 1 clean line of sword light, quiet and final, and the second son of the Zhang family of Liang stopped being anyone's problem, most of all his own. He died with an expression of pure astonishment on his swollen face, died not believing, right up to the last instant, that I would actually do it. A lot of them would die wearing that exact look before this story was through. You'd honestly think word would get around, that somebody would put up a notice, but it never quite did. Zhang Han came up off the ground scrambling, not for his sword, but for the door, clawing at the air, and in that I understood that the elder brother had grasped the whole situation a great deal faster than the younger one ever could have. He'd done the math in a heartbeat, and the math said run. But grasping a thing and outrunning it are two entirely different skills, and he only had the first one. He made it out of the courtyard. He made it up into open air, 100 meters, and climbing, genuinely fast, fast enough that a slower man would have lost him. A single stroke of Sword Tao went up after him, unhurried, certain, and caught him at the top of his arc, and he came back down like the other kite with its string cut, and that was both Zhang brothers, gone in a single morning, in front of a full crowd, by the hand of the punching bag they'd been emptying their pockets into for 3 years. The instant Zhang Han's life fed into me, I broke another shackle, cracked clean through mountain shaking, and into the profound finger realm. That's when I really understood the shape of the demon art, not a cultivation method at all, not really. A mouth. It had been eating the Zhang brothers the whole time, silent under all that pretty holy air, and it had grown fat. Thunder rolled in over the Holy Land, dark clouds stacking up, and I could feel powerful auras closing in from every direction, so I did what I do best. I searched both bodies fast, took everything worth taking, and jumped off the cliff behind the courtyard into open sky, and I was gone before the elders arrived to find 2 corpses and a crowd all pointing the same way. I ran, and while I ran, a mountain away, in a place I'd never been, a man I'd never met was about to throw his entire life away for me, and I didn't have the faintest idea. I only found out later. I'm going to tell you now anyway, because it's the part of this whole story I still can't tell straight-faced. His name was Su Longwei. A few hundred years back, he'd been the single most terrifying blade in the world, the man who once swept across 14 states with one sword and became a living legend in a single afternoon. Then something broke his heart, or his sword heart, and he swore an oath. He would never leave his pavilion again, not until he'd grasped the ultimate meaning of the way of the sword. And so the world slowly forgot him. The legends faded. People assumed he was dead, or as good as. He wasn't dead. He was fishing. And on the day I killed the Zhang brothers, his daughter came home crying. Su Meilin. The Sword Immortal. The Ice Queen who'd said nothing while a teacup shattered at my feet. She went to her father's mountain in tears, and the old man took one look at her red eyes and got very quiet, and then he got the whole story out of her, and then he stopped being quiet, because Su Longwei did not have a grandson named Ye Yu, as far as he knew. He had a grandson named Ye Hao, the golden boy, the one they'd showed him, the one he'd fed advice to and grown fond of, and now his own daughter was sitting in front of him confessing that there was another one, an eldest son, dumped in Liang at 3, farmed out to strangers, left alone for 20 years, never mentioned, never once brought to meet the grandfather who might have loved him. I'm told the old man's face went through several weathers. "Insolent fools," he said. "If you had no time, why not hand the child to me? How could you leave a 3-year-old alone in Liang and call it protection?" And then he did the thing that shook 100 mountains awake. He stood up. He, who had not left his pavilion in centuries, who had sworn on his own broken heart to stay until he mastered the sword, he broke the oath. Just like that. He reached out over the lake, and a sword flew up from the bottom of it, the peach blossom divine sword. And when it cleared the water, it cried out so loud that its cry carried 100 miles, and in caves all across the wilderness, ancient monsters that hadn't opened their eyes in 100 years opened their eyes. Peach blossoms cast shadows, divine swords fly, someone gasped, somewhere far off. The peach blossom sword immortal has drawn his blade, but he swore he'd never come out until he'd mastered the sword. Has he? Has he mastered it? He hadn't. He just didn't care anymore. He had a grandson he'd never met, wandering the world alone with the whole Zhang clan about to come down on his head, and next to that, a centuries-old oath weighed exactly nothing. I didn't know any of this. I was busy falling off a cliff, congratulating myself on my morning's work, with no idea that somewhere a legend had just picked up his sword and pointed it at the horizon and started walking toward a boy who had no clue he existed. That's the thing about this whole story, if I'm honest. All the parts I'm proud of, I did on purpose. And all the parts that actually saved me, somebody did while I wasn't looking. You kill 2 sons of a great family in one morning, you should probably expect the family to have opinions. Zhang Tian, the clan head, 7th realm, a man who hadn't lost his temper in 100 years, smashed his own priceless table to powder when the news reached him and put the entire Zhang clan into the field. Not a squad, not a hunting party, everyone, thousands of them, pouring out across Liang with a single order ringing in their ears. Find the boy, take him alive, and bring him back so the clan head can kill him personally, slowly, with an audience. The whole capital tipped over into a manhunt while the festival lanterns were still lit for some celebration nobody could remember the name of anymore. Leading it was a man named Zhang Lei, 5th realm peak, and famous less for his cultivation than for his methods. The family's shadow, the one they sent when they wanted something done in a way you don't bring up over dinner. He carried a set of bone-piercing nails he was very proud of and used often. Remember those too. They come back around, and sooner than you'd think. There was exactly one decent man in that whole gilded Holy Land, a law enforcement elder called Li Bo, who knew perfectly well that the old Ye Yu had spent 3 years standing in the punishment hall, taking the blame for crimes that boys with better surnames had committed. He knew, and he'd never once been able to do a single thing about it, because clearing an innocent poor kid's name in a place like that only gets the poor kid killed faster and quieter. He couldn't save me either, but he didn't enjoy it, and in that place, that made him a saint. Everybody else enjoyed it enormously. I ran the whole day. And I want to firmly correct any impression that I was gliding through this ordeal like some serene, untouchable hero, because I was not even a little. I'd already taken Ye Hao's palm to the chest that morning, then fought and killed Jiang Kai and Jiang Han, and now Jiang Lei was on my heels, with Jiang elders folding in from both flanks like a closing hand, and my spiritual power was a candle that had been burning at both ends since dawn. Carefree wind riding is fast, genuinely, gloriously fast, faster than any 10 of them roped together, but you cannot run forever on an empty tank, and my tank was running on the smell of an empty tank. I get it now, I said out loud, gasping, sprinting flat out over broken country under a sky stacking up with lightning. You lying system, this isn't the ultimate demon god life. This is the ultimate stray dog life. Every other transmigrator in every other story is out there right now showing off and slapping faces and lounging on a throne, and I'm the one being chased across 3 provinces like I stole the crown jewels. I had technically stolen something. That was the whole problem, but it seemed rude to bring up while I was running for my life on the strength of it. They cornered me eventually, the way you always get cornered when your legs give out a half step before your enemy's patience does. Zhang Lei closed the distance, elder sealing off the wings, and there was nothing ahead of me but a cliff edge and a long drop into the dark. So I did the only thing left to do. I pulled out a bowl of bright red blood, Jiang Kai's, saved carefully from the room, because I am a man who thinks 2 moves ahead even mid-slaughter. And I plugged my nose like a child taking medicine, and I drank it down. The world went red at the edges. The bloodthirsty demon god roared awake on real, powerful, fresh blood, and my strength didn't double. It went up several times over, punching me straight into a 4th realm, 3rd grade fury for one glorious narrow window. And in that window, when Zhang Lei came in confident and slow, absolutely certain a half-dead 1st realm boy had nothing left in the tank to surprise him with, I drew Tianxi and gave him the very first stroke of one sword to slay immortals. Somewhere above the 9 heavens, a gap tore itself open, and 100 meters of sword light came down like the sky had abruptly decided to edit the landscape and start with him. Zhang Lei got his guard up, full credit. His reflexes were a century sharper than his little brother's, and his guard was not remotely enough. The sword energy went straight through his barrier and took his arm off clean at the shoulder, and the 5th realm peak expert who'd come strolling to collect me let out a scream I will be honest and admit I enjoyed, and reeled back, off balance, one limb lighter than he'd started the morning. The demon art latched onto the essence blood spilling out of that wound, and I cracked into another rank on the spot, standing on a cliff, which was wonderful. It also emptied the last true drop out of my tank, right down to the bottom, and I could feel the other Jiang auras closing the last of the distance, and there was now exactly one exit left in the whole world. The cliff behind me went down into a place the disciples of the Holy Land only ever spoke of in whispers, with their eyes flicking to the doors, the dead spirit abyss, a forbidden zone. A mass grave from the immortal wars, they said, packed to the brim with vengeful ghosts and undead things stronger than the 9th realm, its evil aura thick enough to rot the soul clean out of anyone foolish or desperate enough to set foot in it. A place where even a genuine top-tier expert wouldn't tread without a very good reason and a very fast exit. And I was neither top tier nor in possession of an exit. That kid jumped into the abyss of the dead, I heard someone shout from above me, and the sheer disgust and disbelief in it was almost funny enough to make the fall worth it on its own. Turns out the forbidden zone of certain death becomes a real popular option the moment the only alternative is Zhang Lei with a fresh grudge, 1 arm, and a bag of nails. I jumped. The fall went on long enough for me to have a good thorough reflection on my life choices, both lifetimes worth. Then I was down in the dark, in the cold, in the single worst-smelling air 2 entire lives had ever offered me, and the very instant my feet touched the ground, a chorus of pale, layered wailing rose up out of the mist all around me, and pairs of blood-red eyes opened in the dark, 1, then 2, then 100, then 500, then 1,000, undead, an ocean of them, and I was fresh warm meat that had just walked in the front door on my own 2 legs and rung the bell. And that is when a very fine day turned. Hard, into the day I nearly died. Because I was drained flat, my soul was shielded and blinded by the very evil energy that was supposed to be killing me, so I couldn't sense a thing coming, and out of the deep mist a shape the size of a mountain uncoiled, the sky-devouring bull python. An ancient monster the old records named as the true guardian of that abyss, a thing older than the Holy Land, and it fixed its two enormous eyes on the small, warm, exhausted human who had just dropped, uninvited, into the middle of its living room. I did the math. The math said crippled if I was lucky, and paced if I wasn't. I couldn't run. No fuel left in me. Not a drop. I couldn't fight. That thing was a whole realm and change past anything I could so much as scratch. So I stood there in the cold mist and watched my own ending come uncoiling toward me, and I had exactly enough energy left in the tank to be deeply, personally annoyed about the timing of it. And then a sword came out of the dark. I didn't see where it came from. I couldn't have told you. One moment the bull python was bearing down on me with its mouth opening like a cave, and the next, a single stroke of swordlight, cold, clean, and absolutely impossibly certain, slammed into the side of that mountain and drove it back, howling, into the mist. It happened so fast I couldn't track it with my eyes or my senses. There was a shape, for less than a heartbeat, right at the very edge of my vision. An old man, one hand tucked calmly behind his back. And then he was gone, and the bull python was gone with him, and I was left standing alone in a forbidden zone that had just a half-second earlier been fully committed to eating me, uneaten. Who? I started. Nobody answered. The mist swallowed the word whole. I didn't know who he was. I want to be very clear about that because it matters later and it matters now and it's going to keep mattering. Some old man, a sword like something out of a legend, and he'd spent one impossible, effortless stroke driving off an ancient monster to save the life of a total stranger and then vanished back into the dark without so much as leaving a name behind for me to thank. I stood there in the cold with 1,000 undead in the mist, all deciding, slowly, whether I was worth the walk, and I thought, 2 days a demon king, and twice now, twice. Somebody's reached out of the shadows to save my life while I wasn't looking, and neither time did they stay long enough to be thanked. I really was going to have to find out who kept doing that. Just, After I dealt with the 1,000 undead currently making up their minds about me. Here's the thing about a forbidden zone of certain death if you happen to be a demon. It's a spa. The evil energy that was supposed to rot my soul out through my ears rolled over me instead like a warm bath at the end of a long day. Not a scratch, not a flicker of harm. If anything, I felt better down there in the poison dark than I'd felt up in the honest sunshine, which told me something about my new constitution that I decided firmly not to examine too closely by candlelight. And the 1,000 hungry undead who'd risen up out of the mist to eat me, the very instant that righteous Confucian air of mine washed over them, they stopped dead, like they'd walked face first into a wall of glass. Because, and this is the genuinely beautiful part, the part that made me laugh out loud alone in a tomb, heaven and earth righteous Tao is the natural-born nemesis of the wronged and vengeful dead. My holy demon coat wasn't just a disguise for the living. Down here, among the dead, it was a weapon, so I stopped running for my life and started farming. I want to be measured about this, because it sounds like a boast, and it's really just accounting. I killed undead in that abyss for half an hour. In that half hour, I climbed 2 more small realms, cracked open into the 5th rank of the profound finger, and best of all, cleanest of all, every single one I cut down poured its energy back into me and refilled the spiritual power I'd burned down to fumes getting here. The sword drank, the demon drank, I drank, everybody at the table drank. I had fallen, screaming, into the place the entire Holy Land spoke about in frightened whispers. The tomb of the immortal wars, the grave that top-tier experts wouldn't set a single toe inside. And to me, it was an all-you-can-eat buffet with the lights turned off and no other customers. This isn't a forbidden zone, I said, laughing, cutting down another wailing shape as it drifted at me. This is my private training ground. This is a membership gym and I'm the only member. Thanks for the tomb, fellas. Great location. Very quiet. Excellent natural lighting, if you're into red. Then I found the cave. Down a crack in the rock barely wide enough to turn my shoulders through, the world suddenly opened out into a hidden little paradise, cold, gloomy, dripping, but somehow blessed, a pocket of hush inside all that howling and growing across every surface of it, tens of thousands of them nodding in the dark, were 2 plants I recognized from the Demon Codex in my head on sight, the way you recognize your own name, 9-leaf Paris, ghost grass. 2 of the deadliest poison herbs the entire book cataloged, the kind that drop you dead where you stand if you so much as chew one wrong, and also, if you happen to know precisely what you're doing, and I did, the exact core ingredients for a certain very potent, very illegal, very valuable wine. Holy crap, I said to nobody, to the cave, to my own ridiculous luck. We've struck it rich. We've actually struck it rich. Because I just walked out of the Ye family with the clothes on my back and not one thing else, and a demon king with no money is just a homeless man with a bad attitude and a sword. But a cave stuffed floor to ceiling with poison worth a genuine fortune, plus a recipe in my skull for turning that poison into wine, that solved the money problem before I'd even climb back up into daylight. And it solved a bigger, quieter problem too, one that had been nagging at the back of my mind since I'd stood on that cliff and drank Jonkai's blood out of a bowl in front of a crowd. See, the Bloodthirsty Demon God is a monster of a talent, but it comes with one deeply, fatally undignified requirement. To trigger it, I have to either cough up my own blood or drink somebody else's, and coughing up 3 pounds of my own blood before a fight has even started, or worse, standing there in front of people calmly drinking from a bowl like some kind of theatrical stage vampire, that is not the look. That is not the brand. People who don't know me might get entirely the wrong idea. They might start to think I was some sort of big scary demon head. Can't have that. I have a reputation to protect. Righteous, upright, holy even, basically a saint. So I stood in that glowing cave full of gently nodding poison, killing the occasional undead that squeezed its way in through the crack after me, and I turned the problem over and over, and when it finally clicked into place, I actually gasped out loud in the dark. Wine. Put the blood in the wine, fold it in with my poison herbs, brew the whole thing down properly, and suddenly the horrible, undignified blood drinking transforms, completely, into a gentleman taking a discreet and civilized sip from his flask in the middle of a duel, healing up, powering up, triggering the talent, all in one smooth, respectable, deniable motion. Do it right, and I could trigger the Bloodthirsty Demon God as many times as I pleased, whenever I pleased, forever, and sell the enormous surplus for a mountain of spirit stones on the side. Financial freedom and infinite power in the very same bottle. It was, without exaggeration, the best idea I'd ever had in either life, and I'd had it standing knee-deep in poison at the bottom of a mass grave. There was, of course, one small sourcing issue. Jonkai's blood was already gone, down my throat on the cliff. The recipe needed human blood, and the only human being within 100 miles in any direction was me, and I was absolutely not about to start bleeding myself dry for inventory. That felt like a very bad precedent to set on day one of a new business. The universe, bless its attentive heart, heard me thinking exactly that, and immediately provided. Because Zhang Lei, the one-armed shadow of the Zhang family, the man whose arm I'd taken clean off on the cliff, turned out to be so loyal or so bottomlessly greedy for the divine sword he'd glimpsed in my hand that he had dived into the abyss of the dead after me. And the abyss of the dead does not care about your realm, your reputation, or your grudge. By the time he'd clawed his way to my little cave, the thousands of undead crowding the entrance had already turned on him and stripped him half to death, and he came stumbling in through the crack bloodied and reeling and looking, frankly, like a mad Taoist priest who just lost a bare-knuckle fight with an entire mob, which was, more or less, exactly what had happened. He saw me, and his killing intent flared right back up, one arm and all, and he charged, still absolutely, unshakably certain, even now, even here, that he was the predator in this room, and I was the prey. The trouble was, I'd leveled up quite considerably in the half hour since he'd last seen me. He came in expecting the drained, gasping boy from the cliff edge, and what he met instead was a wave of righteous air erupting off me that stopped him cold in his tracks, and then my figure simply gone from where it had been standing, like a blown-out candle, and then a hand closing on the back of his neck, and then the lights going out behind his eyes. I caught him before he hit the stone. Wouldn't want to bruise the merchandise before I'd even inventoried it. I strung him up in the cave with a set of nails I found in his own storage bag. His bone-piercing nails, the ones he was so proud of, the ones he'd used on so very many people who couldn't fight back. They seal a man's power completely and hold him nice and still and quiet. Poetic, I thought, threading them home. He'd carried the perfect tool for his own retirement around on his belt the entire time and never once seen it coming. I left him hanging there to swing gently in the dark and went through the rest of his things at my leisure. The man was loaded, 100,000 spirit stones. 100,000, I said, staring into the bag. You absolute son of a bitch. I used to earn 2 a month. 2, 1 coin, then the other coin. It would have taken me 1,000,000 years of scraping to see this much money in one place, and you were just carrying it around loose in a bag to fund hunting me down. For what? A monthly bounty of a few hundred? What is wrong with rich people? What is fundamentally, structurally wrong with all of you? I nudged him with the toe of my boot. He didn't stir. Somewhere far above the both of us, the entire Zhang clan was tearing the wilderness apart looking for me, screaming my name across 3 provinces, and the one man they'd sent to bring me back was hanging peacefully upside down in a cave full of poison flowers, quietly being reclassified as an ingredient. Old man, I told his unconscious face, you like the chase so much. Well, get comfortable. Your nightmare's only just getting started, and I've got 3 days of recipes to test. I had 100,000 spirit stones, a cave of poison worth 10 times that, a divine sword, a demon that ate the dead for breakfast, and a supplier of premium human blood who was now contractually and physically obligated to stay exactly where I'd put him. I sat down at my new medicine furnace, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work. Brewing a legendary wine from scratch, it turns out, is mostly failing. The first batch, I got the poison ratios wrong and the furnace exploded. Not a small pop. A real, throat-clearing detonation that filled the cave with red smoke and knocked me flat on my back. Zhang Lei, dozing in his nails, jolted. Awake, convinced his rescuers had finally arrived, blasting the door down to save him, and the disappointment on his face when the smoke cleared and he realized it was just my alchemy misfiring again was, I have to say, one of the small, pure joys of that entire week. He actually groaned, out loud, like I'd let him down personally. Sorry, I told him, walking over with an empty bowl and my eyebrows singed. Bad news. I'm going to need to borrow a little more. Borrow, you lunatic. You've drained me twice already. And I'll return it, I said, in the form of very good wine. Don't be stingy. It doesn't suit you. A little blood between colleagues. You've got plenty and you're not using it for anything important. I need it for being alive. You're being dramatic. Bowl. I'm going to be honest with you about this part because I promised myself at the start of all this that I would be, and because the alternative is worse. Zhang Lei spent 3 days as my supplier. Every failed batch cost him a bowl, and every single time I emptied him a little too far and his head started to loll, I'd tuck a precious spirit herb into his mouth so he'd top back up because a dead supplier is a bad supplier, and I'll admit it, because it genuinely broke my heart, it honestly wrung me out to think of losing even one drop of premium material to my own carelessness. He called me a devil roughly 40 times over those 3 days. I stopped keeping count somewhere around 15. His material was excellent, that's the thing. That's what made the waste feel so tragic. 5th realm peak, centuries deep. The stove reacted to it like I'd poured lightning straight into the fire, and the stronger his blood ran, the stronger the wine came out. And every time I noticed that, I started daydreaming about catching a 9th realm expert someday and keeping him on a comfortable retainer, and I had to talk myself down off it, because my strength was still much too small to be kidnapping 9th realm anythings, and a man has to know his current bracket. Priorities. First the wine, then the empire. You don't skip steps. Second batch, wrong temperature, curdled. Third batch, close, but it came out smelling of wet dog, which is not the note you want in a luxury product. Fourth batch went sideways in a way I still don't fully understand, and I'd rather not discuss. Each one cost me a bowl and cost Zhang Lei a fresh round of theological commentary on my character. On the third night, it worked. I lifted a bottle out of the furnace and it glowed a deep, vibrant, living red, like the finest grape wine held up to a candle, except that the smell coming off it didn't stir hunger. It stirred something older and hungrier than hunger, something down in the blood, some ancient part of me that sat up and paid attention. Drinking it, I understood, was going to be like drinking a fight. I took one sip. The force went straight up through the top of my skull, my whole body lit like a struck match, the bloodthirsty demon god screaming awake on the powerful blood baked into the brew, and the boost was several times anything I'd felt drinking straight and undignified from a bowl. I went up a small realm on a single mouthful. And then it kept climbing because the wine kept feeding the talent and the talent kept feeding the climb, and by the time the whole thing finally settled in my chest, I'd hit the 4th realm peak. One sip. From the toilet of the profession to a 4th realm peak in one civilized swallow. My God, I said, staring at the bottle like it might introduce itself. This is better than every so-called immortal brew I ever sneaked off the Ye family's table while nobody was watching me. Those tasted like horse piss with pretensions. This tastes like winning. This tastes like the last laugh. 20 bottles. That first successful batch made. I capped them one by one, carefully, reverently, my whole future sealed up in glass and lined along a stone shelf in a cave at the bottom of the world. Then I looked over at Zhang Lei, hanging there, watching me with an expression I had rarely seen on the face of a 5th realm expert. Not rage anymore, not even fear exactly, something past fear, pure, bottomless, vertiginous dread. He'd cultivated for who knows how many centuries, and he had never once, in all of it, in all the horrors he'd surely seen and done, watched a man calmly refine drinkable wine out of human blood. To him I had stopped being a demon cultivator somewhere around the 2nd batch. I'd become something that didn't have a name yet. You're a monster, he whispered. You're an absolute monster. You call yourself a proper Holy Land disciple. This is the evil path. This is worse than the evil path. The evil path has standards you're not meeting. Come on, I said, honestly a little insulted. That's not fair. I gave you the herb every single time. I kept you fed. I've talked to you more than my own family has in 20 years. I am, hands down, the most considerate person you have ever been kidnapped by, and I'd wager you've been kidnapped by a few. Toward the end, he stopped cursing and started begging, which I liked less because begging is harder to be flippant at. Let me go. I have elderly parents. I have young children at home. I was blind. I was a fool. I never should have chased you. Just forget I exist and let me go. And I watched all that century-deep arrogance run out of the man and pool on the cave floor, and I felt something I hadn't expected and didn't much enjoy, not triumph, something quieter, and a little sad and a little tired. You know, I told him, I actually liked you better arrogant. This part's beneath you. It's beneath both of us. I'd gotten everything I needed out of him, and then some. 20 bottles of the wine that was going to build my entire second life. 100,000 spirit stones from his bag, and a fourth realm peak I would have needed years to reach the slow, honest, respectable way. Zhonglei wasn't much use to me anymore, and keeping him hanging there was just cruelty with extra steps and a longer runtime, and whatever else I am, and the list is getting long. I know, I don't do cruelty for its own sake. That's a rich family hobby, and I'm not rich family. I just started dressing like them. Rest, I told him. Qianxi flashed once, clean and quick. He stopped being anyone's problem, including his own. I had a name for the wine by then too, because a product needs a name, and the thing I made out of a kidnapped bounty hunter does not move units at a premium price point. I turned it over in my head, all the fancy poison folded into it, all the borrowed power, all the arrogance of the thing. It needed a name to match, something that promised too much and then delivered, something that would break clean out of the pack of timid horse-piss wines this world was drowning in. Heavenly Immortal Brew, I decided. Even an immortal descending to earth would be flat on his back after 3 cups. I liked the sound of that. I liked it a great deal. And I had no idea, sitting in that cave capping bottles with singed eyebrows, just how many important people I was about to lay flat on their backs with 3 cups of the stuff, or that one of them would turn out to be the single most important man in either of my 2 lives. But that's getting ahead of myself. Back in Liang, at that exact hour, my father was about to learn my name in the worst possible way, in front of an entire city. And I would have traded a bottle of the good stuff, the top shelf pour, the 1,000-stone bottle, just to have been there to watch it happen. While I was down in the dark making wine out of a bounty hunter, Liang was coming apart at the seams over me, and I love telling this part. It started with Zhang Tian getting word that his last living reason to breathe had jumped into the abyss of the dead. He mobilized everything, not to bring me back. He'd figured that ship had sailed with his 2 dead sons, but to recover a body, any scrap of me, to nail to a wall. Thousands of his people flooded toward the abyss. Meanwhile, at the prince's mansion, Ye Shun had spent 3 days locked in a dark room. His wife gone, his eldest son gone, his golden boy already off to his precious trials. The great king of the north, sitting alone in the dark, discovering that a title doesn't keep you warm. When he finally came out, old Ye Wei couldn't hold it in anymore and told him, the young master killed the Zhang sons and has been hunted for 3 days and jumped into the abyss and nobody knows if he's alive. 3 days. The great Ye Shun's face, they said, went to stone. 3 days his son had been hunted by a mere family like the Zhangs, and nobody had told him because he'd locked himself away sulking, and now, right on cue, a white streak of light came through the door, and Su Meilin slapped him across the face and told him she must have been blind to marry him. If she hadn't run into Lian Hua and heard about it by accident, she'd still be in the dark. So the king of the north marched on the Zhang family, and half the city followed to watch, because when a man who once stopped 1,000,000 demons single-handed decides to go somewhere angry, you find a good window. Here's where it gets good. Zhang Tian came out fully expecting to grovel to the prince. He had no idea the 2 events were connected, no idea the boy he'd hunted and the son the prince had come about were the same person. He kept swearing he'd never touched Yahao, the golden boy. Must be some mistake, your highness. And Ye Shun, out of patience, out of time, every wasted minute meaning more danger for the son he still thought he could save, slammed a palm into Zhang Tian's chest and put him in a crater, and then he turned to the whole watching city and said the sentence that changed everything. If anything has happened to my son, to Ye Yu, I will make all 3 million people in Liang pay for it. Ye Yu, you could hear the name, Land, because that name belonged to a nobody, a poor Holy Land disciple, a street thug who'd killed 2 Zhang boys. And now the king of the north was standing at the Zhang gate promising to drown the capital in blood over him. The connection went through the crowd like a crack through ice. Ye Yu is the prince's son. Ye Yu is the prince's son. And Zhang Tian, hearing it, felt every drop of strength leave his body because he had just spent 3 days ordering the whole world to hunt down and kill the eldest son of the man now standing over him in a crater. Now, I especially enjoy this part. Ye Shun's threat did something wonderful. It didn't just scare the Zhangs, it conscripted the entire city, because if I died, 3 million people died with me, and suddenly every powerful family in Liang had a very personal stake in keeping me alive. Overnight, hundreds of thousands of cultivators who'd never heard my name were sprinting toward the abyss to save the skin of a boy they didn't know, to save their own. My father, trying to save my life, had turned the whole capital into my rescue party by threatening to murder it. There's a lesson in there about how that man loves people. I've never quite worked out what it is. And in a corner of all this, at a tavern, two familiar idiots were choking on their drinks. Su Jing and Lin Tao, the old owner's two street buddies. The three musketeers, -1, the two guys who'd shared 100 cheap drinks with the boy whose body I now wore, who'd sworn to live and die together, who thought their friend Ye Yu was exactly what he looked like, a broke, funny deadbeat who ran faster than a dog when the bill came. Beast! Su Jing was grinding out through his teeth, gripping the edge of the table. He's the crown prince of the north? Our Ye Yu, the one who ran from every bar tab in Liang like a startled dog? 20 years and he never breathed one word. He's so tight-lipped No. He owes me 5 spirit stones. He is not allowed to be dead. You can't die owing your sworn brother money. That's in the code. There's no code, Lin Tao said weakly. There's a code now. I'm writing it. Rule 1. He lives. They'd shared everything with that boy. Every cheap bottle, every bad night, every grand drunken plan for a future none of them could afford. Everything except the one fact that would have explained him, and to be fair to them, he'd never known it himself either. But at that moment, in that tavern, Su Jing did the math out loud and arrived at a conclusion that reorganized his entire understanding of his own life. His broke, funny, bill-dodging drinking buddy was the eldest son of the single most powerful man in the region, which made him, by the ancient and sacred and legally binding logic of drinking buddies, the sworn brother of a crown prince. Take off, he whispered, to no one, eyes shining. We're taking off. I did not know any of this yet. I was in a cave capping bottles, blissfully unaware that my dead man's name had just become the most dangerous word in Liang, that my father had threatened 3 million lives to save me, that my abandonment had turned into a citywide emergency. I found out later, all of it, in pieces. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't do something to me, hearing it. Not gratitude, let's not get carried away. But there is a specific, complicated flavor to learning that the exact people who couldn't spare you a room while you lived would burn a city to the ground the second they thought you were dead. It's not love. It's not love. It's the thing that this whole story is really about. If you strip away the wine and the swords, people who only know how to reach for you once you're too far to reach. They were about to reach into that cave and find something that made the Ice Queen scream. Here is how the whole capital ended up standing at the lip of the abyss of the dead, staring down into the mist, praying to find me alive. Hundreds of thousands of them, every family that mattered, every disciple who could hold a sword, roped down into the one place in Liang no sane cultivator would enter, all of them hunting for a boy most of them had walked past for 20 years without seeing. The Zhangs, terrified now, had flipped from a manhunt to a rescue overnight, Zhang Tian screaming at his own elders to bring the young prince up breathing, and his elders, who still hadn't caught up with the news, kept cheerfully reassuring him that it was fine. They'd already run down and killed the little Ye Yu brat days ago, no need to worry. Watching Zhang Tian's face during those conversations must have been its own kind of theater. Then they hauled up a skeleton. Bones, picked clean, dragged out of the dark on ropes, and around its neck, a jade pendant everyone recognized. My pendant. The one thing the old Ye Yu had owned that was worth anything. A baby token from a family that gave him nothing else. Su Meilin saw it, and her legs went out from under her. The Sword Immortal of the North Sea, 8th Realm, a woman who'd cut down armies, folded into the dirt like wet paper and couldn't make a sound. Her son, 20 years too late and now a bag of bones on a rope. Except it wasn't me. An old Zhang elder, of all people, was the one who looked closer and went white because he recognized the clothes on those bones, and the bones were too old, months too old, and they belonged to a one-armed man the whole clan knew. Zhang Lei, my wine supplier. I'd taken his pendant. No, I'd taken his everything. And the jade around his neck was mine because I'd hung it there myself. And I'll be honest, I did not think that little bit of housekeeping through, because it just gave my mother the worst 30 seconds of her life, and then the second worst. She didn't wait. The moment she understood it wasn't my body, Su Meilin was over the edge and into the abyss herself, straight down into the ghost fog that stops 9th Realm experts cold, because an 8th Realm mother looking for her child does not read the safety signs. And down there, in my cave, she found my workshop, the medicine furnace, the walls of poison flowers, 9-leaf Paris and ghost grass, the deadliest herbs in the book, and blood, my spilled brewing blood, dried dark across the stone. She read it exactly wrong, and exactly as heartbreakingly as it's possible to read a thing. She didn't see a demon's brewery. She saw a starving, hunted boy who jumped into a place of certain death and, with nothing to eat and nowhere to run, had been reduced to boiling poison in a broken pot just to have something in his stomach. She saw her son eating poison to stay alive one more day while his family celebrated 40 miles away. That was not what happened. What happened was I was building a wine empire out of a kidnapped assassin. But I want you to sit with the gap between those two things for a second, because that gap is the whole tragedy of these people. They were never wrong about the facts being terrible. They were only ever wrong about which direction the terror pointed. They pictured a helpless child. The child had by then become the single most dangerous thing in that abyss. They just would not update the picture, because the picture of the helpless child was the one that let them keep believing they still had a son to save. Up top, old Ye Wei finally broke. Ye Wei was the family butler, the one man in that whole gilded house who'd actually watched the boy for 20 years, and he'd held his tongue his entire life because that's what a good servant does. He didn't hold it anymore. He stood in front of Ye Shun, the king of the north, the man who'd stopped a million-strong invasion with one spear, and he told him the truth in full, in a voice that didn't shake because he'd earned the right to say it plainly. The young master never cultivated, my lord, because he never had the time. He worked. Every single month a boy named Zhang Kai took what little he earned, and every month he went out and earned it again, because there was no one anywhere he could go to complain to. He walked an hour before dawn to a family that never gave him a room, and he left again after dark, and not once in all of it did he say that he was tired. He took the blame in the punishment hall for the sons of better families for 3 years, so that boys who'd never known a cold night wouldn't have to feel a switch. And in all those years, my lord, this is the part I need you to hear. In all those years, he never once dreamed of the sword, or the throne, or your great name. He dreamed of a small restaurant, a little place with warm light and good wine, where the two friends he loved could sit down and eat their fill and never see a bill. That was the entire ambition of your eldest son, the whole of it, a restaurant. And he couldn't even get that, because he couldn't even get a room. They said Ye Shun didn't speak. The king of the north, the man who had never once in his life been told a single thing he could not answer, argue down, or crush, stood in the wind at the very edge of the abyss that had swallowed his son, and had no answer. There wasn't one. For the first time in 100 years, there was simply nothing for him to say, and no one to say it to, and no way at all to command the afternoon to give him back what he'd thrown away with both hands. And then he turned around and killed Zhang Tian, one strike. The 7th Realm clan head who'd hunted my body to nail to a wall was simply gone. A name Liang used to be afraid of ended between 2 breaths. And then Ye Shun, in a voice with nothing left in it, gave the order, and Ye Wei, who it turned out was a great deal more than a butler, carried it out, and by the end of that day, the Zhang family was a thing that used to exist. I'll leave it there. The genre demands a reckoning, and the Zhangs got theirs. You don't need me to walk you through the rooms. A great house that had run Liyang for generations was struck out of the world in an afternoon, over a boy they'd robbed of pocket change, and the lesson the survivors took away, the very few survivors, was the one lesson this world teaches over and over, and nobody ever learns until it's them. You never know which nobody is the one you can't afford. It should have been the end of it. Grief, a massacre, a father staring into a pit. Except then the diviner showed up. Meng Tianzheng, Grand Elder of the Holy Land, the man who read fate the way you and I read a menu, came to the edge of the abyss, and he looked into it, and he frowned, and he said the words that turned the whole funeral inside out. The young prince's life star has not fallen. He's not dead. He went north, out an escape tunnel they hadn't found under the mountains toward the great snow terrace and whatever waited past it, alive. And into the silence that followed that, one more question sat there that nobody in Liang thought to ask because they were all too busy being stunned that I was breathing. One question I want you holding on to, because it matters more than any of them yet knew. Where was the old man with the peach blossom sword? The grandfather who'd broken a 100-year oath and walked off his mountain to find a grandson he'd never met. 3 days gone, and not one word. He wasn't in Liang. He wasn't at the abyss. He was already ahead of me, in the dark, clearing the road I hadn't started walking yet. I climbed out of the abyss a week later on the far side, onto a snowfield that ran white all the way to the edge of the world, and I stood there in the wind with 100,000 spirit stones, 20 bottles of legendary wine, a demon that ate the dead, and absolutely nowhere in the world to be. That's a strange feeling, by the way, nowhere to be. My whole first life I'd had somewhere to be at every hour of the day, a route, a schedule, a manager texting me rows of question marks. My whole second life I'd been somebody's standing disappointment on a fixed and thankless timetable. And now, standing on that snow with no address, no master, no family with a single claim on me, was the first genuinely free breath either of my lives had ever managed to take. Cold air, empty white, and no one anywhere who could tell me to kneel. I stood in it for a while, just breathing, letting it be true. I couldn't go back to Liang, obviously. Half the city thought I was dead by now, and the other half sincerely wanted me that way, and the very last thing I needed was to walk back into an active manhunt purely to inform people I'd survived it. Forward then, North had very nearly killed me. So I turned my back on the snow and went the other way, toward warmth, toward crowds, toward the biggest, richest, most gloriously overstuffed city within walking distance, Hanjiang City, and on the long road there, I made myself a promise, and I want to tell you what it was, because it's the only genuinely soft thing in this whole hard story, and it quietly drove everything that came after. The boy whose body I was wearing, the real Ye Yu, the one who drank himself to death in the cold, he'd never wanted a throne. I'd been through his memories enough times by then to know it by heart, the way you know a song you didn't choose to learn. He wanted a restaurant, a small one, a little place with warm light and good wine and a full table, where the two idiots he called his brothers could sit down and eat and never once see a bill, where nobody who wandered in got left out in the cold. That was the entire dream. That was the whole of what he ever asked the world for, and the world, with all its holy lands and immortal kings and mountains of spirit stones, couldn't even manage that one small thing for him. So I decided I'd build it. Not the little version he'd pictured, warm and modest and safe. The real one. The enormous one. The kind of place the whole world would claw and bribe and duel to get a table in. The kind his awful family would have to hear about, secondhand, from a humiliating distance. I'd take his one small warm wish and I'd make it monstrous, out of spite and out of love, which, in my personal experience, across 2 lifetimes, are very frequently the exact same fuel poured from 2 different bottles. Power, money, status. A beautiful woman on the balcony of a restaurant that quietly owned the whole city. I wanted all of it, every piece, no apologies. I'd spent 40-odd years and 2 full lives being patiently, endlessly instructed to want less, to expect less, to fold smaller. I was done with less, and I were finished. Hanjiang did not disappoint. I walked in through gates you could have flown a temple through, into streets stacked so high with lanterns and painted towers and floating pleasure boats that they blocked out the sky, and I felt my whole loose plan snap into hard focus, because a city like this runs on precisely 2 things, money and reputation, and I had just, down in a cave, worked out how to manufacture both out of thin air. I found the biggest restaurant in the city, a towering place called the Drunken Dream Pavilion, sat myself down at a good table, and ordered their finest immortal wine, purely to scout what I was up against. I nearly spat it back across the room, horse piss, watery, timid, apologetic horse piss, and they were charging a small fortune for it, and the entire room was sipping it with reverent little sighs because not one soul in this whole world had ever tasted anything better. I sat there with a bottle of the heavenly immortal brew burning a hole in my storage ring, listening to genuinely rich and powerful men murmur their appreciation over fermented dishwater, and I had to physically stop myself from laughing out loud at the table. These people were not ready for me. Nobody in this city was even slightly ready for me, and that is exactly when I overheard the thing the whole city was buzzing about, and my entire plan doubled in size in the space of a single breath. A poetry competition, not a small one either, not some tea house recital. The White Deer Academy, the great Confucian institution, the single place in the whole world where power flowed not from swords but from words, where a good enough line could shake the literal heavens, thunder and light and pure heaven and earth energy pouring down onto the poet who spoke it. The White Deer Academy was holding its grand competition right here in Hanjiang, 20 days out, and every genius from every holy land under the sky was already pouring into the city for it. And the prize had the whole tavern drunk on rumor before they'd finished their first cup, a divine herb, the twin spirit flower. I set my cup down very, very carefully when I heard the name, because the twin spirit flower was not just any herb. It was, according to the demon codex living behind my eyes, one of exactly 2 things left on this earth that I needed to forge the true demon god body, the real one, the full inheritance, the whole point of the 3rd door I'd chosen on day 1. The single most valuable object within 1,000 miles was, in 20 days, going to be handed to whoever wrote the best poem at a contest in the very city I just wandered into with nowhere to be. I sat back in my chair, and I want you to understand the exact size of the grin I was wearing, because I'm told it visibly frightened the waiter into another room. Here is the one thing these poor, elegant, doomed people did not know about me. In my first life, before the delivery scooter and the Maybach and the rain on the road, I had gone to school. Bored out of my skull, distracted, mostly asleep in the back row, but I had sat in a classroom, on a planet these cultivators will never so much as dream of, and I had been forced, against my every wish, to memorize the greatest poems ever composed by the greatest poets who ever lived. Brother Bai, Brother Du, Brother Su. 1,000 years of the very finest verse in the entire history of the human species, filed away in the back of my head, gathering dust, worth precisely nothing to anyone, ever. Worth, apparently, on this world, a divine flower and the complete remaking of a city. 20 days, I murmured down into my terrible horse-piss wine, grinning like a lunatic. You're giving me 20 whole days and a divine flower to write down poems I already know by heart. Poems I got graded on. Poems I complained about having to learn. And then there was one more detail, one final thing passed around that tavern that turned an already perfect business plan into a personal holiday. The competition's brightest expected star, the young genius everyone assumed would sweep the whole thing, the shining pride of the immortal mountain Holy Land, was a boy named Yahao, my darling little brother, the one who'd palmed me through a wall in the family hall and told everyone I started it, coming to Hanjiang in 20 days to be crowned the single greatest young talent in all the world in front of every important person alive at a poetry contest against me. I finished the terrible wine to the dregs, left the terrified waiter a generous and apologetic tip, and got up to go find myself somewhere to live because I had a restaurant to build, a flower to steal, an empire to break ground on, and a perfect little brother to introduce, very publicly, in front of the whole world, to the collected works of poets whose sandals he was not fit to carry across a room. The universe had dumped me on an empty snowfield with nowhere in the world to be. 8 days later, it had handed me the perfect stage, the perfect prize, and the perfect victim, all in one city, on one date, wrapped with a bow. For once, I thought, walking out into all those lanterns, the universe and I were on exactly the same page. Before I left the Drunken Dream Pavilion, I did a little market research, which is a polite way of saying I took out one of my 20 bottles to remind myself precisely what I was about to do to this city's entire wine industry. I'd already worked the business model out on the walk-in. You do not sell a legendary wine like bread, you sell it like a secret. A trickle, never a flood, a handful of bottles a month, no more, priced in careful tiers so that the merely rich can brag about the cheap one and the truly rich go quietly to war over the expensive one, and every single bottle that doesn't exist makes the ones that do worth twice as much. Scarcity is a drug, and I was about to become the only dealer in a city full of men who'd never been told no. I sat there sketching prices in my head, 10 spirit stones for the bottom shelf, 1,000 for the top, and I was so pleased with myself, so lost in the arithmetic of my own future, that I honestly did not notice the old man until his hand was already closing around my bottle. He just took it, reached across the table and plucked my heavenly immortal brew right off it like the thing belonged to him. An elegant old man in plain, well-worn robes, with a face like weathered stone and a pair of eyes that were doing a genuinely poor job of pretending to be ordinary. Before I could get out a single word about the sanctity of personal property, he'd poured himself a cup, thrown it back, and gone very still. I opened my mouth to say something cutting about it. He poured a second cup. Then a third. And on that third cup, the most powerful presence I had felt since I'd arrived in this world quietly rolled off him and then buckled, because the old man's sharp eyes had gone soft and unfocused, and his ramrod straight back had suddenly discovered the wall behind him, and I realized with a slow and spreading delight that I was watching a genuine ninth realm master, a monster, a man who could probably level this pavilion by clearing his throat, get comprehensively, helplessly floored by 3 cups of my wine. 3 cups. I'd said it as a joke when I named the stuff. Even an immortal descending to Earth would be flat on his back after 3 cups. I had not, at that point, actually tested the claim on an immortal. The universe, generous and attentive as ever, had simply sent one over to my table to try it on. Good wine, the old man mumbled, eyes half shut, and there was a whole lifetime of something buried in the way he said it, something that didn't match the 2 small words at all. Where did a child get his hands on wine like this? And here is where the afternoon got complicated, because 2 very different things happened inside my head at the exact same moment. The first thing was appetite. I looked at that old man, 9th realm, essence blood so rich and deep it was practically glowing out through the skin of his hands, and the demon in me did the cold math it always does, the math I'm not proud of, but that I promised I wouldn't lie to you about. A 9th realm master on my brewing nails would produce a wine that made this current batch taste like the pavilion's horse piss. He was, in the coldest back room of my mind, the single greatest ingredient I had ever watched walk up to my table and cheerfully hand me its own throat. The second thing was a feeling I couldn't name, and it stopped the first thing cold, because there was something about him, the set of the shoulders, the one hand that kept drifting, even drunk, to rest behind his back, a shape I had seen exactly once, for half a heartbeat, at the very edge of my vision, in the dark at the bottom of the world, right before a sword came out of nowhere and drove a mountain-sized monster off me and saved my life. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't even properly remember it. But some quiet animal part of me looked at this drunk old man over a stolen cup of wine and went still and flatly would not let me reach for him. I've done a great many cold things in this story, and I'll do a great many more before it's through. But I have exactly one rule underneath all of it, one single line the demon does not get to cross, and it is this: I do not eat the people who save me. The Zhang family robbed me for 3 years and got a full reckoning for it, but this old man had, maybe, possibly, somewhere in the dark, spent something precious to keep a stranger breathing in a pit and asked for nothing in return, and now he wanted a quiet drink at the end of a long life. You do not put that man on a nail, whatever else I am, and again, the list keeps growing. I am not that. So I pushed the whole bottle across the table to him. On the house, old-timer, I said. You've clearly had a hard century or 3. Drink up. Consider it a gift from a fellow connoisseur. He looked at me for a long, long moment, and something moved behind those drunk, fogged eyes that I would not understand for a very long time. Not surprise, exactly. More like a man quietly confirming an answer he'd already half suspected and being fiercely, privately glad of it. Then he smiled and drank and asked me my name, and I told him, "Yeah, you," and he rolled the 2 syllables around his mouth like they were part of the wine, like he was tasting them. What I did not know, what I would not know until it was far, far too late to say the thing I'd have given anything to say, was that the old man was not testing my wine at all. He was testing me. He had found his grandson at last after a lifetime in a tavern, wearing a demon's power and a killer's easy calm, and he had sat himself down at my table to learn one single thing and one thing only: whether the boy the whole world had thrown away had gone cruel all the way through to the center, or whether there was still one line left in him somewhere that he wouldn't cross. I passed. I passed without ever once knowing I was being examined, on pure instinct, on the one rule I keep, over a cup of stolen wine, and somewhere underneath all that drunk old stone, the sword master of 14 states thought, more or less, that's my grandson, grateful to the ones who lift him up, merciless to the ones who grind him down. Exactly right, exactly as he should be. Then he got up, no longer drunk in the slightest, I noticed, and told a younger man I hadn't even registered sitting 3 tables back, a quiet fellow named Lin Yi, to make very sure that a certain prince and princess never learned which city their lost son had wandered into, and he walked out into the crowd, off to some grotto heaven at the far edge of the maps, to do a dangerous thing he'd been putting off for 100 years, because he was suddenly running very short on time and had, just as suddenly, found a reason to spend every last bit of what was left. I thought I'd bought a lonely old drunk a free bottle. I had in fact just been quietly and permanently adopted, and I missed the entire thing. I was still feeling rather good about my own restraint when I stepped out of the pavilion and walked directly into the last person on earth I wanted to see. Lian Hua, my darling former fiancée, the saintess. Cold and lovely, and dressed like the first frost of winter, with her gossiping shadow Lu Ji hovering half a step behind her. She'd been sent to find me, and she'd found me, and she wasted no time at all getting to it. "Ye you. Come back with me." Her voice was doing its very best impression of tender concern. "Uncle Ye and Aunt Sue are worried sick over you. They've been searching everywhere, every city. Come home. Stop all of this." I looked at her for a second, and I laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a tired one. "Worried sick," I repeated. "That's nice. That's really nice. They found the sickness right around the time I stopped being conveniently available to insult, did they?" I took a step closer, and to her credit, she didn't back away. "You want me to come home? Fine. Answer me one thing first, and answer it honestly, because you were raised your whole life to fear heaven, and I would genuinely like to watch you try. Swear it to me, out loud, on the open sky, right here, that in all those years you were promised to me, you never once, not a single time, had an improper thought about my brother, about Ye Hao. Swear that, and I'll walk home with you tonight." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. I waited. I made her feel every long second of the nothing. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. "Don't feel too badly about it. You're exactly like them, is the thing. Every last one of you found your feelings for me at the precise moment they stopped costing you anything, and by then, I was already gone. You disgust me, Lian Hua, and the genuinely sad part, the part I can't even enjoy, is that I don't think you're a bad person. Not really. You're just theirs. You always were. We're not from the same world, you and I. We never were. Not for one day of it. Go home. Tell them you saw me, and that I looked well. It even has the advantage of being true." And I walked around her and off into the crowd, and I did not look back once. Behind me, the saintess of the immortal mountain stood very still in the middle of a moving street, and understood all at once that there was no road back. The guilt she'd been carrying for weeks had just quietly finished turning into something heavier, something with no name and no cure, the exact thing this entire story is named after. I, meanwhile, had a building to go by. The next morning, the harbor filled up with a ship that thought very highly of itself, and the whole city went out to bow to it. He Tianyang, the heavenly saint. A young man with a bloodline that ran all the way back to an actual emperor, undefeated for 20 years, the kind of genius they start building shrines to before he's even dead. He came down the gangplank like the ground. Beneath him should be grateful for the privilege, and the crowd along the water made a single held breath sound, and I stood at the back of it eating a bun and looking at the finest essence blood I had ever seen in either of my lives. Understand my exact position here. Everyone else on that waterfront looked at Heitianyang and saw a living legend. I looked at Heitianyang and saw a limited edition vintage that had learned to walk, descendant of an emperor's blood. Do you have any idea what a man like that would do to a batch of the brew? One bottle refined off that bloodline, and I could put a whole holy land face down on the floor. Every instinct the demon ever gave me stood straight up and pointed and said, "That one, we want that one." And I had to have a firm word with myself, gently, that he was undefeated for 20 years and I had been a demon king for approximately 2 weeks, and that perhaps I should let the fantasy mature a little in the cellar before I did anything about it. He felt me looking. Of course he did. Men like that feel everything. It's how they stay men like that. His eyes came up off the crowd and found mine across a sea of bowing strangers, and they were cold and flat and certain. And then, for just a moment, they narrowed. He didn't know me. He didn't need to. He just knew, the way a very old predator knows before it can say why, that something in this cheerful crowd was looking at him the wrong way around, looking at him like a butcher looks at a prize hog at market. Then his people swept him off toward the finest manor in the city, and the moment closed, and I filed him under later and went home to sit with a problem that had been quietly nagging at me for days, the problem that, more than any enemy, kept me from simply becoming a god by the weekend. Here's the problem, and it matters, so stay with me. I could steal power. I'd proven that beyond any doubt. Drain a man with the devouring demon art, drink a bowl of blood, jump 3 realms before lunch. The borrowed strength was real, and it was enormous, and it came fast. But that night, I sat down and did something I hadn't made time for since I got here, which was to look honestly inside myself and count what was actually there. The way you count money, you're not sure, is real. And a lot of it wasn't there. A lot of it was hollow, big impressive numbers with nothing standing behind them. In the abyss, my gains had come like a flood at first, and then, quietly, started to shrink, less and less return out of each kill, and I'd been too busy staying alive to stop and ask why. Now, sitting still in a rented room, I finally understood. You cannot drink your way to the top. You can drink your way up the ladder faster than anyone alive, but the rungs only hold your weight if there's something underneath them, and the something underneath is you. Your own understanding, your own comprehension, your own state of mind. All the stolen essence in the world is just fuel poured into an engine, and if the engine is small, most of the fuel just burns off as smoke and noise. Every realm I'd bought with another man's blood was real enough to fight with today, and every one of them would quietly betray me the first time I stood across from someone who'd built the same realm the honest, patient way and truly meant it, which was, once I stopped being annoyed about it, genuinely the best news I'd had all week, because it meant the cheat had a shape, it had edges, it had a catch. It was not going to turn me into a bored, bloated, invincible thing with nothing left to strive for. It was going to make me work and think and grow a mind actually worth the power I kept pouring into it, or it would hand me, gift-wrapped, to the first real master who took me seriously. Every great power in this world has a leash on it somewhere. Mine was inside my own skull, where I couldn't lose it and no one could cut it. I could live with that. Frankly, it came as a relief. I'd have spent this whole story flinching, waiting for the bill on a cheat with no downside. Now I'd met the bill early, and it was fair. So, fuel, I had by the barrel. Understanding, I had to build with my own 2 hands. And the fastest way I knew to build real understanding, in a world where the right words literally shook the heavens and poured their power into the poet who spoke them, was to go stand in front of that whole world and write down the greatest things ever written and feel exactly what the sky did in response. The contest wasn't only a flower anymore, and it wasn't only a stage to burn my brother on. It was a gymnasium. It was the one place I could grow the inside of me as fast as I'd been growing the outside. While I was working all of this out, 40 miles away, my 2 favorite idiots were busy sealing my fate in a way I'd have found genuinely touching if it hadn't very nearly gotten everyone killed. Su Jing and Lin Tao, the drinking buddies, the surviving 2/3 of the old Yeyu's sworn 3 musketeers, the pair who had just discovered their broke deadbeat friend was secretly a crown prince, could not sit still knowing I was out there somewhere being important without them. So they hatched a plan of truly heroic simplicity. Go to Hanjiang City. Not for me, they assured each other loudly. For the beauties. Hanjiang was famous the world over for beautiful women and famous men, and if they should happen to bump into their lost prince while they were there, sampling the sights, well, that would just be fate, wouldn't it? They said every word of this out loud, at volume, in a crowded tavern, which was the mistake because old Ye Wei the butler kept ears in every tavern in Liang, and within the hour the prince's mansion knew, to the city, where I almost certainly was. My mother nearly took Liang apart with her bare hands. She wanted to leave that same night, cross the world and tear through every street in Hanjiang until she found me. And my father, my proud, cold, brilliant father, said no, not because he didn't want me back. In his own bent and frozen way, I think by then he wanted it badly, worse than he'd have admitted to himself. But Ye Shun had never once in his entire towering life apologized to anyone, least of all to a son, and the idea of racing across the world to grovel to a boy he'd told to kneel 2 weeks earlier was, quite literally, more than the great king of the north could make his body do. So he did what men like him always do, with a feeling they can't face. He turned love into logistics. There was a poetry contest, he reasoned, that every genius alive was flooding into Hanjiang to attend. If his eldest turned out to be the nobody he'd always assumed, no loss, no exposure. But if that ridiculous rumor of a poet immortal had even a grain of truth in it, then he'd secure his son an invitation, salt the contest with his own people, surround the boy in front of the entire world, and bring him home. Not ask. Bring. He would hand me a trap wrapped up in a homecoming and call the whole thing fatherhood, and a 3-word letter arrived from Lianhua to confirm the address, Hanjiang City, and the great machine of the north began, slowly, to turn and point itself at me. I want you to hold the shape of this in your head, because it is beautiful in an awful way. My family was, at that exact hour, quietly assembling a plan to surround me at a poetry contest and force me to come home. And I was, at that exact hour, quietly assembling a plan to walk into the very same poetry contest and burn my perfect little brother to the ground in front of every important person they intended to invite to watch. We were going to meet in the middle. We were even going to meet at the same event, on the same day, under the same sky. We simply had extremely, irreconcilably different agendas for the occasion. I cracked my knuckles, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and started remembering poems to build a wine empire. I needed 3 things I didn't have: a pile of rare materials, a building, and a face for the business that wasn't my own, because a man wanted for 2 murders back in Liang really shouldn't be painting his name over a restaurant door. I found all 3 in one afternoon, in a shop, standing quietly in a corner watching a total stranger commit financial violence. I'd gone into the Tianbao Pavilion, the big auction house, the serious one, to price out the materials for my next batch of weeping blood pills, and the numbers made me want to lie down on the cool marble floor and rest. 100,000 spirit stones and change, just for the shopping list. I had 100,000 total, to my name, in the whole world. That's not a war chest, that's a single trip to the market, and I was standing there doing grim arithmetic when I heard a young man at the next counter talking a merchant gently into an early grave. The merchant had a bag of grave goods, dug up from somewhere he very much shouldn't have been digging, and he'd opened at 10,000. The young man laughed in his face. Not rudely, that was the artistry of it. Warmly. Almost lovingly, the way you laugh at a small child who said something adorable and completely wrong. And then he went to work. He found flaws in the merchandise that I am fairly certain he was inventing on the spot, but he described each one with such wounded, personal sincerity that the merchant actually started apologizing to him. He implied he'd be doing the man a genuine favor by taking such cursed, troublesome goods off his hands at all. He turned to leave 4 separate times and got called back 4 separate times, each time by a lower number. By the end of it, the merchant was down to 2,000 and thanking him, actually, audibly thanking him, for the privilege, and the young man paid like he was leaving a modest tip. I have met powerful people, and clever people, and dangerous people. I had never, in 2 entire lives, seen anyone that good at making another person feel wonderful about losing. I walked up behind him, pointed at my own catastrophic shopping list, and asked if he'd be interested in making some money. His name was Xiao Guang, and he turned out to be one of mine. Not a demon, a reject. His mother had been a courtesan, and his father's family, the Xiao clan, royalty, blood that ran all the way back to an immortal king, had been so profoundly appalled by the mere fact of his existence that they'd kept him around only as a convenient punching bag, right up until the day he finally put a bully who richly deserved it through a wall, and they threw him out entirely for the unforgivable crime of hitting back. So here he was, a prince by blood, a beggar by family decree, surviving on a silver tongue and a well-tended grudge, and when he looked at me, he saw exactly the same thing I'd seen in him. Somebody the world had thrown out for the sin of being inconvenient, who had flatly declined to stay thrown out. We got along immediately. Some friendships take years. Some take one shared glance across a room full of people who've hurt you both. I let him haggle my entire list. 100,000 spirit stones of rare materials cost me 8,000 by the time Xiao Guang was finished, and 3 separate merchants shook his hand and wished him well while he did it to them. Then I bought him lunch, and I told him plainly that I was going to make him rich. He said without heat that everyone says that. I said, not like me. He said everyone says that too. So to prove it, I told him I was about to secure the two of us a personal invitation to the single biggest event in the city by writing something on a wall. He thought I was joking, or drunk, or both. So I took him to the Tianshang Pavilion to show him I was neither. Now, you have to understand what poetry actually is in this world, because where I come from, a poem gets you a polite nod, a small check, and a spot in a journal nobody reads on purpose. Here, words have physical weight. Here, if you write something true enough and grand enough, the sky itself sits up and agrees with you. Heaven and earth pour their raw power down onto the poet. Confucian scholars can level mountains with a sufficiently good line, and the great old masters can feel a genuine masterpiece being born from 100 miles off, like a sudden change in the weather in their bones. It is the one and only power in this entire world that you cannot steal, cannot drain, cannot fake, cannot buy. Either the heavens sign off on your words, or they don't, and everyone present can see which way it went. I walked up to the poetry wall of the finest pavilion in all of Hanjiang, in front of a room full of scholars sipping their timid horse-piss wine, borrowed a brush, dipped it, and wrote down a poem a man named Du Fu composed on a planet none of these people will ever hear the name of roughly 1,200 years before a single one of them was born. I won't try to hand you the whole thing, because some works don't survive the retelling, and this is one of them. But it's the one that opens with the great river coming down out of heaven and roaring off to the sea, never to come back. The one about how the years ambush you in the mirror, black hair at dawn and snow by nightfall. So pour the wine and don't stop pouring. Kill the fine horse and trade the good fur coat for another round of it, because a talent like mine was put on this earth to be used and spent, and the money always, always comes back around in the end. It is a poem about being magnificent and doomed, and drinking straight through the middle of both. It is, and I say this with full authority, the single greatest drinking song ever written by any human being on any world, and I was about to find out exactly what this one did when it heard it for the very first time. I finished the last stroke, and I set down the brush, and I stepped back. For one long second, nothing. The scholars squinted at the wall. Somebody near the back started to snicker. Then the first character began, very faintly, to glow. The sky over Hanjiang, a clear sky, a nothing special afternoon sky, knotted itself into a black vortex directly above the pavilion roof. Thunder rolled, with no storm anywhere behind it. And then the heavens opened and poured, not rain, but raw, undiluted heaven and earth energy, a solid column of it, straight down through the roof and into me. So much power, so fast, that my meridians lit up like a city grid at dusk, and I felt myself come apart at the seams and slam back together one whole realm higher, and then again, and then again. I'd walked up to that wall in the profound finger realm. By the time the light show finally guttered out and the thunder rolled off, I'd broken clean into cave heaven. 3 realms of stolen, borrowed ground made suddenly, permanently, gloriously solid, because for once in my life, I hadn't had to drain it out of anyone. The words were mine to give, and the heavens had paid me for them, directly, in full, on the spot. The room was on the floor, some of them literally, and through the doors came an old man moving a great deal faster than his dignity should have permitted. Gu Ming, one of the true great Confucians of the age, a man who had felt the poem being born clear across the city and simply run the entire way, and he stood in front of that wall and read it once, and I honestly thought he might faint. He kept touching his own chest, over his heart, like he was checking it was still working. The pavilion's owner, a sharp and beautiful woman called Fairy Linksy, opened her mouth to name a price for the wall. And then, before anyone could so much as reach for a purse, she closed her mouth and took the price back, unspoken, and declared that the wall was not for sale, not for any number, not for any sum ever minted. It would hang exactly where it was, for the whole world to travel and come and see, for as long as the pavilion stood. I let them marvel for a while. It seemed only fair. Then I picked the brush back up, one more time, and I signed it. 2 characters. Clear and unhurried, so there would be no confusion later in anyone's mind about whose city this was quietly about to become. Ye you. And I took my dumbstruck brand new business partner by the elbow and steered him out into the evening before the crowd remembered to start having questions, leaving behind a poem that would be copied out by dawn into the hand of every scholar in Hanjiang, a great Confucian clutching at his own heart, and a name, the dead deliveryman's name, the abandoned son's name, my name, nailed to the most famous wall in the richest city in the world. Xiaoguang didn't say a single word for 3 full streets. Then he stopped walking and turned and looked at me and said very quietly, "Boss, what are you?" "Thirsty," I said. "Come on, I've got something I want you to taste. I poured Xiaoguang 1 cup of the heavenly immortal brew in a rented room that night, and I laid out the whole plan while he stared at the cup like it might bite him. The plan was elegant, if I do say so myself, and I do. We open a restaurant, we sell exactly 1 wine, mine, and we are very careful never to sell much of it. 100 bottles a month, not 1 drop more, no matter how they beg. Priced in a ladder. 10 spirit stones at the bottom rung, 1,000 at the top. So that owning the cheap bottle is a story a man tells at parties, and owning the expensive one is a small war a man wins in public. Scarcity does all the marketing for free and never asks for a wage. Every bottle that doesn't exist makes the ones that do worth more. I was about to become the only dealer of the only drug in a city full of very rich addicts who didn't know they were addicts yet. But, I went on, a restaurant that rich makes enemies faster than money, and a nobody with a fortune and no name gets robbed in this world before breakfast. So we don't just sell wine, we hang poems, my poems. We make the place a shrine to the written word, we pack it wall to wall with scholars, and scholars in this world are sacred, protected, untouchable. You wreck a poet's hall in this culture, and every Confucian master from here to the capital comes down on your skull like a mountain. Nobody powerful enough to rob me would ever dare, because I'd be standing behind 10,000 men who can crack the sky with a well-turned sentence. The wine makes the money. The poetry builds the wall around the money. Neither one works alone. Together they're a fortress that prints coin. That's insane, Xiaoguang said slowly. That's a beautiful, insane plan, and there's no possible way it will. He'd picked up the cup somewhere in the middle of doubting me. He took a sip to steady his nerves. I'd like to describe what happened next with some dignity, for his sake, but there isn't any available. The brew hit him and his eyes went enormous. I felt his cultivation lurch and then climb. The man broke through an entire realm sitting in a rented chair, mid-sentence, off 1 single mouthful, and then the very same mouthful that had just leveled him up reached back and laid him flat. My brilliant new business partner slid gently off the chair and onto the floorboards, 1 cup deep, grinning up at the water-stained ceiling like he'd just been shown the private face of God and found it agreeable. Never fail, he finished from the floor in a voice full of wonder. It'll never fail. Boss, boss. We are going to own this entire city. Why am I on the ground? What is happening to my legs? 1 cup, I said, looking down at him. You lasted 1 cup. I keep trying to tell people. Even an immortal only gets 3, and you are not an immortal, Xiaoguang. You are a very talented salesman with the tolerance of a small bird. He wanted to name the place himself once he could sit up again, and I let him try, purely for the entertainment, and his suggestions were uniformly catastrophic. The Xiaoguang Golden Prosperity Hall of 10,000 Fortunes was the frontrunner, which tells you everything, so I overruled him with the calm authority of a man who had been saving a name for exactly this moment. There was a poem I intended to write on our opening day. An old one, from my first world, about a tower beside a great river, where long ago a man watched a crane lift off and fly away into the clouds and never, ever come back, and he stands at the rail afterward, aching for a home he can no longer reach. It was the loneliest and the most beautiful thing about not being able to go home that any human being had ever managed to write down, and it was, whether I especially wanted it to be or not, a little bit about me. Yellow Crane Tower, I said. The restaurant is called Yellow Crane Tower. You are the owner. Officially, publicly, on every document. Smile a great deal. Sign things with a flourish. And if anyone ever asks who actually makes the wine, you look mysterious. You imply it's someone far above their station, and you change the subject to the weather. And who does actually make the wine? He asked, still flat on his back, staring at the ceiling. A very discreet supplier, I said. Extremely reclusive. Doesn't take visitors. Don't you worry about him. You worry about the menu and the smiling. Because there was a sourcing problem to solve before any of this worked, and I strongly preferred that my brand new partner not be in the room when I solved it. See, 100 bottles a month is a great deal of brew, and every last drop of it needed blood, powerful blood, aged blood, the kind that made the furnace sing, and my one and only supplier was 3 weeks dead and already bottled on a shelf. I needed more cattle. And as it happened, the universe, which had been catering my whole second life with uncanny attentiveness, had once again laid out exactly what I ordered, because 2 very specific men had come to Hanjiang for the contest and were, at that precise moment, drinking themselves cheerfully stupid a few streets over, utterly convinced they were safe. Wei Kuai and Lin Chuan, 2 more sons of the old Holy Land, and not innocent bystanders either, not by a wide margin. These were the 2 who, years ago, from behind a comfortable curtain, had quietly pointed Zhang Han and his brother at the poor kid with no family, who had arranged the beatings and then enjoyed the results from a safe and deniable distance. The architects of half of the old Yeyu's very worst days. They'd heard I'd become famous, a poet immortal no less, with Confucian friends in high places, and they had decided, with the flawless logic of the truly stupid, that this made them safe. Surely a man that respectable, that busy, that celebrated, wouldn't lower himself to settle old scores with small fry like them. They had the reasoning precisely, perfectly backwards. Fame didn't make me safer to bully. Fame made me hungry, well-connected, and extremely hard to punish for anything. I collected them that same night, plucked them right out of the middle of their revelry, quiet and quick, before either one had the wit or the wind to shout, and I walked them out of that pleasure house and out of the city gates and down into a cave I'd prepared for exactly this purpose, warded top to bottom with a formation that swallows sound whole and seals a man's power so completely he couldn't spark a candle flame to save his life. I hung them up beside my furnace, as comfortably as the situation allowed, which was not very. Gentlemen, I told them, once they'd finally stopped sputtering long enough to hear me. Good news. You're going to be part of something much bigger than yourselves. You spent years, from behind a curtain, arranging misery for a boy who couldn't fight back, purely for your own entertainment. Well, I'm going to have you help me arrange something delicious for the whole city instead. And the wonderful part, the truly generous part, is that you won't have to lift a finger to do it. You'll barely have to do anything at all. Just contribute. Regularly. Quietly. For a long, long time. They called me a devil. They always do. I've genuinely stopped taking it personally. It's more or less an official job title at this point, and it comes up in nearly every performance review. I fed them well, because a healthy supplier is a productive supplier, and because I am, whatever the marketing eventually said about me, a considerate man at heart. And every batch of the heavenly immortal brew that flowed out of that cave and up into the golden cups of Hanjiang's finest carried a small, silent contribution from the two men who had spent their youth teaching a lonely boy the one great lesson of this world, that it will hurt you for free and smile while it does it. I thought that was a very fair arrangement, better than fair, poetic even, balanced. Yellow Crane Tower would open its doors in 3 days. I had the name, I had the wine, I had the front man, and now I had the suppliers. All that was left to arrange was a crowd, and I already knew exactly how a man summons one of those, in a city like this, out of thin air. You hang out a poem where the world can see it, and then you stand back and you wait for the world to come running. By the 3rd day, my poem had eaten the whole province. Bring in the Wine got copied out of that pavilion by dawn, and it just kept going, hand to hand, city to city, scholar to scholar, until men 3 provinces away were reciting it at each other across their cups and weeping into their sleeves. The great Confucian Gu Ming went around telling anyone who'd hold still that a Poet Immortal had appeared in Hanjiang, an event of the age, and word of it climbed all the way up to the White Deer Academy itself, to the Grand Elder Bai Xingchen, the old man who ran the whole contest and held my flower. And I heard, secondhand, that when Bai Xingchen read my poem, he went quiet for a very long time, and then said softly that he would like very much to meet the young man who wrote it. When the man holding your dream prize starts asking after you by name 3 weeks before the contest, you are doing something right. He Tianyang, meanwhile, was doing math I didn't love. He'd sent a couple of quiet, capable people to look into the mysterious new poet, the way careful legends always do before they decide how they feel about you, and those quiet, capable people had turned up dead, without a mark on them, without a trace of who or how. And he Tianyang was old enough in this business to know exactly what an untraceable death around a target means. It means a protector, a good one, a hidden one, patient and lethal and watching. He began to wonder, out loud to no one, whether this Poet Immortal had come out of Liang, and whether there was a great deal more standing behind me than poems. He was closer to the truth than he knew, and he had no idea the protector wasn't even mine on purpose, wasn't even someone I'd met, was in fact an old man I'd have to be told about years too late. I learned all that later. At the time, I was busy meeting the most beautiful woman in the Emperor State and appraising her like a bottle. Fairy Xinyu came into Hanjiang on a boat the whole waterfront turned out to sea, and I understood the fuss the instant I laid eyes on her, because she was, coldly and objectively, a masterpiece, 6th realm, remote as a winter moon, the kind of beauty that makes a loud crowd forget to make noise. She'd read my poem on the way into the city and been genuinely moved by it, and she'd come down to the water's edge half hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who'd written the thing that moved her. Our eyes met across the lake. Hers went sharp and curious and a little puzzled, because even at that distance she could feel the righteous sword energy rolling off me, and it did not match one word of the drunk tavern poet story she'd been sold. And mine, I'll be honest with you, because I promised at the start I would, went appraising. I gave her 100. Full marks, no notes, the single finest specimen I had seen in this world, or the last. And then, because I am what I am, the very next thought that crossed my traitor mind was that a bloodline that exquisite would make an absolutely sublime vintage. A beauty wine, delicate, Floral, faintly heartbreaking, one sip and a grown man would propose marriage to the furniture, and I had to take myself firmly by the collar because you cannot walk around the harbor eyeing the realm's great fairy as a seasonal limited release. It isn't gentlemanly. Also, she was 6th realm and would have turned me into a decorative red mist before I got the cork out. For contrast, someone in the crowd mentioned that Lianhua had been asking after me too, all the way from Liang. I gave Lianhua a 60, maybe a 60. Beauty loses a lot of its shine once you've watched it stand there in silence, rather than answer one honest question about your brother. Then I went home and got stronger, because appraising fairies does not forge a demon god body. I'd finished 10 weeping blood pills off the materials Xiaoguang had haggled down to pocket change. Concentrated, terrible, wonderful little things, each one a powerful life boiled down to a mouthful, and I swallowed 5 in one sitting, which was reckless, and it worked, which is becoming the recurring theme of my second life. The power went through me like a river through a broken dam, and I broke all the way to the extreme of the cave heaven realm, the 10th and final gate of it, the very ceiling. Within my own realm there was nothing left in the city that could touch me. 5 pills still in the drawer, and the only thing now standing between me and the real body, the full demon god inheritance, the thing the system had promised on day 1, was a single flower sitting in a locked case at the top of a poetry contest. The cave did try to give me one bad night in the middle of all that ascending. Lin Chuan, the sneakier and more patient of my 2 new suppliers, had been holding a trump in reserve this whole time, waiting for me to get careless. A family treasure, a genuine one, sewn into his own flesh where a search wouldn't find it, a hidden pendant that could, in the right hands at the right moment, crack a binding formation. And on the night my whole attention was turned inward on the breakthrough, he used it, slipped his seal, got his bonds loose, and bolted for the entrance with the pendant clutched in his fist and freedom 4 steps away. He got about 3 of the 4 steps. My formation did not care in the slightest how clever he was, or how precious his pendant, or how long he'd waited. It slammed him backward into the cave wall like a fish thrown at a window, and I strolled over, still half glowing from the pills, and relieved him of the treasure. Thank you, I'll be taking that genuinely lovely craftsmanship. Is that a real Lin family heirloom? And hung him back up on his hook. Nice try, I told him, and I meant it. Genuinely. Real points for patience. But you're a supplier now, Lin Chuan, and suppliers don't get to hand in their notice. Take it up with management. That's me. Request denied. Far away, in Liang, the counterpoint to all my good fortune was playing itself out, and it is the part that finally broke Lianhua for good, so I'll give it to you, though I'll keep it short, because I've never enjoyed dwelling in that house. While my mother tore across the map searching city by desperate city for her lost son, and while my father plotted his poetry contest ambush in the sacred name of bringing me home, the Yi family manor lit every single lantern it owned and threw a party, a birthday party, for Ye Hao, my golden little brother. Turned another year older, and half the nobility of the region came to toast him, tables groaning with delicacies, music drifting out over the water, the whole great house glowing warm against the dark, the grief for the missing eldest son apparently, keeping regular business hours and clocking out for celebrations. Lianhua walked into that party looking for some comfort and found a festival, and something in her went cold all the way down to the floor of her. She understood, standing there in all that warm and careless light, that these people had never once truly meant it, that the searching and the worrying was a thing they performed in the gaps between banquets, that if I had died in that abyss, they'd have mourned me beautifully for a season, and then lit the lanterns right back up for the son who actually mattered. She handed Ye Hao his birthday gift without a word, and without a scrap of warmth in it, and she turned around and walked out of the brightest room in Liang, and my golden little brother watched her go and burned, because even his own birthday couldn't compete with the ghost of the brother everyone had suddenly, infuriatingly, become unable to stop talking about. Back in Hanjiang, I found Xiaoguang that same night sitting alone with a cup, quiet in the particular way outcasts go quiet when someone else's holiday reminds them of everything they were thrown out of. His family had discarded him too. I sat down next to him and didn't say anything for a while. You waiting for them to figure out they were wrong about you? I asked eventually. The Zhao family, waiting for the day they finally come and say, we see it now, we were mistaken, come home? He didn't answer, which was an answer. Don't, I said. I mean this, don't wait for them to realize. They won't, and on the slim chance they ever do, it'll only be because you got big enough to be useful to them, and that is not the same thing as being loved, and it never once heals right. So don't build your life around the apology. Build the thing instead. Own the city. Get so tall they have to read about you in someone else's mouth. I tapped the rim of his cup. The best revenge was never making them sorry, partner. It's climbing so far up that they can't reach you anymore even to say it. Drink your wine. We open tomorrow, and tomorrow we own this town. I believed every single word of it. I'd realized much later, describing my own family the whole time, and pretending the whole time that I was only talking about his. I have to stop the story here and tell you about something I wasn't there for, because it's the most important thing that happened that month and I didn't learn about it until much later, and when I did, it rearranged a lot of what I thought I knew. Remember the old drunk? The one who took my whole bottle in the tavern and floored himself on 3 cups and asked my name like it meant something. While I was opening a restaurant and raiding fairies, that old man was walking, alone, to the edge of the known maps, to a place called the Langya Grotto Heaven, to do a thing he'd sworn off for 100 years. His name was Su Longwei. He was a swordmaster who'd once cut his way across 14 states without losing, and he was my grandfather, my mother's father, and I did not know he existed. He'd broken a lifelong oath to come down off his mountain and find the grandson everyone else had thrown away, and he'd found me, in a tavern, wearing a demon's power and one stubborn rule, and he decided in that moment that he was going to spend what was left of his life making sure the world couldn't take me, because he was dying. That's the part I didn't know. He'd been stuck for centuries just below the 10th realm, his heart of the sword cracked long ago, and a cracked Dao heart at his level doesn't heal. It kills you, slowly, on a clock. He didn't have years. He had a little time and one thing he wanted to buy with it, and it wasn't his own breakthrough. It was a leaf. At the Langya Grotto Heaven stands the Heavenly Gate, and the Heavenly Gate has been guarded for generations by the Zhang clan, and if you can fight your way up the 3000 Bluestone Road and knock on that door, the Zhang clan owes you a mulberry leaf, a binding promise, sworn on their whole existence, that they will protect the bearer's chosen descendant from any mortal danger, once, absolutely, no matter who's swinging. A single guaranteed rescue in a world that hands them out to no one. That was what my grandfather wanted. Not for himself, for me. A stranger he'd shared one bottle with, and here's the knife in it. The head of the Jiang clan, the man guarding that gate, was named Jiang Hu, and Jiang Hu was the reason my grandfather's heart had cracked in the first place. 100 years ago, Jiang Hu had beaten Su Longwei, not with a better sword, but with a dirty trick, and the trick had used my mother, Su Meilin, as a girl, as bait, as a distraction thrown across the board at the worst moment. That's the wound that had crippled the greatest sword heart of his age for a century, so walk the picture with me. An old man, dying, fighting his way to the one door in the world that could protect the grandson his daughter had abandoned, and the door was held by the very man who'd once used that same daughter to break him. He was going to have to conquer the memory that ruined him in order to guarantee the safety of the child that Memory's family had thrown out. If you built a machine specifically to test whether a man's love was real, you could not build a crueler one than the road he chose to walk that day, on purpose, for me. He walked it. The 3000 Bluestone Road lit up with killing arrays the moment he set foot on it. The 8 desolate purgatory, the 4 symbols formations, generations of the Zhang clan's deadliest work, hundreds of their experts standing on the stones between him and the gate. A dying old man against a fortress. The smart money would not have taken him. The smart money had never seen the peach blossom divine sword come out of its sheath. I'm told the whole grotto heaven went white. He didn't fight like a dying man. He fought like a man who'd finally, after 100 wasted years, remembered what a sword was for. Every array they threw at him he cut in half, every wall of experts folded. And somewhere in the middle of it, at the worst moment, cornered, outnumbered, he stopped defending and used a stroke they call blue sea surges, a move you only draw when you've decided your own life is a fair price for the next 10 feet of road, and the sea of enemies came apart in front of it, and the crack in his heart that had crippled him for a century simply healed, right there, mid-swing, because he'd finally found something worth dying with a whole heart for, and the sword knew it before he did. They say that as he climbed the last of the bluestones toward the shaking gate, bleeding, white-haired, laughing like a young man, he said one thing out loud, to no one, to the mountain, to a grandson 40 miles away, pouring wine for strangers. Child, wait for me. Grandpa's going to get you a mulberry leaf. And the heavenly gate, which had not opened in generations, cracked. I was, at that hour, asleep in a rented room, dreaming about menu prices. I didn't feel a thing. I didn't know his name. I'd have told you I had no family left in the world that would cross the street for me, let alone a road paved with killing arrays. I was wrong by exactly one old man, and I wouldn't find out how wrong until he came to collect the only payment he ever asked me for, which was a cup of wine and a poem. But that's a few days off yet. First I had a restaurant to open and a little brother to ruin. Back to me. I'm better at telling the parts with me in them anyway. Yellow Crane Tower opened its doors, and the city lost its mind, which was the plan. And then 2 old men in expensive robes walked in looking for their sons, which was also, though they didn't know it, the plan. Wei Hong and Lin Feng, the patriarchs of the Wei and Lin families, fathers of the 2 young gentlemen currently hanging in my cave contributing to the beverage program. They'd traced their missing boys as far as Hanjiang and hit a wall, and while they were in town, they'd heard about the famous new poet with the famous new wine, and they came to have a look. And when they saw that the toast of the city was a young man in plain robes with no family name behind him, something ugly and familiar woke up in them, the thing rich men feel when they meet a nobody who's doing well, and they decided, out loud, at volume, that a poor, rootless nobody getting above himself was really just begging to be put back in his place. "You," Wei Hong said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear, jabbing a ringed finger at me. "You wrote that poem on the wall? A gutter-born wine cellar with no clan, no master, no name worth speaking? Someone's been letting you forget yourself. In a civilized region, a creature like you would know to lower his eyes when his betters are drinking." The room went quiet and tense. Everyone knew who the Wei and Lin families were. Nobody moved. I was, apparently, about to be publicly humiliated in my own restaurant, and half the guests were already bracing to watch the beloved Poet Immortal get slapped down by real power. I didn't say a word. I just lowered my eyes, slow, dignified, the picture of a wronged talent swallowing yet another indignity, and let the whole room see me take it. That's when the doors blew open a second time, and the temperature of the place dropped 10 degrees. Kong Yunfeng, a Confucian grandmaster, 8th realm, one of the genuinely towering figures of the age, and, as my research had promised, a man with one great blazing prejudice at the center of him. He despised the aristocracy, despised inherited power, despised with the specific white-hot loathing of a man who'd watched it happen his whole life, the sight of men who were handed everything using it to grind down men who were handed nothing. He'd read Bring in the Wine, he'd come to meet its author, and he had walked in on precisely the scene most engineered to set him on fire, 2 fat old lords in silk sneering at a lone poor scholar who wouldn't even raise his eyes to defend himself. He did not ask for context. He didn't want context. The story told itself, and it was the exact story he'd been aching his whole life to punish. "Who?" Kong Yunfeng said, and the word came with enough pressure to rattle the cups. "Taught you that your blood makes you a man's better?" Wei Hong turned, saw who it was, and went the color of paper. "Grandmaster Kong, this is a family matter. This creature has forgotten his. This creature," Kong Yunfeng thundered, crossing the floor, "wrote a poem that made the heavens weep while you were born onto a pile of your grandfather's spirit stones and have added nothing to it but weight. You stand in the house of a true talent and you sneer at him for being born poor? I was born poor. Half the sages whose words you can't be bothered to read were born poor. Get out. Get out of this house, and thank whatever ancestor you're so proud of that I found you insulting a scholar and not robbing one, or you'd leave in a smaller container." He put the 2 patriarchs through the emotional ringer and most of the way out the door in about 90 seconds flat. Then he turned to me, this 8th realm giant, and declared to the entire packed house that the poet Ye Yu was henceforth under his personal protection. Any man who troubled me troubled Kong Yunfeng, and they were welcome to consider very carefully what that meant. I want to be honest about my contribution to this scene, because it was considerable and it was all acting. I hadn't said one word. I hadn't needed to. I'd simply stood there and let myself look like exactly what he needed me to be. The wrong talent, the noble soul the cruel world keeps trying and failing to crush, dignified and silent under the abuse of his betters. I lowered my eyes at the right moment. I let one small, real, honest thing flicker across my face at the right moment. The genuine bitterness of 20 genuinely stolen years, aimed and fired like a crossbow. He ate it whole. And here's the thing, he wasn't even wrong about me. I had been ground down by rich men for no reason at all. I'd merely left out the recent chapter, the one where I started keeping some of them in a cave and turning them into wine. Then I gave him a poem, and I made sure it was the right poem, not a drinking song this time. I reached back for the 4 lines, the 4 sayings, that a sage named Cheng Hao once wrote to explain what a real scholar is actually for, that a true heart exists to hold up the sky itself, that the learned are here to secure a life and a livelihood for the common people, the ones with no family name, no protector, no one to lower their eyes for, that we exist to carry forward the lost wisdom of the dead sages so it doesn't die with them, and that we are here, finally, to open an age of peace for 10,000 generations not yet born. 4 lines, the entire moral spine of the Confucian world folded into a single breath. The heavens answered before I'd finished the last one. Light, weight, that column of heaven and earth energy pouring down into me, and I broke through again, cracked clean out of the cave heaven and into the sea of wheels, the 5th realm, another wall simply gone, but the realm was the smallest part of it this time. The point was Kong Yunfeng's face as he heard those 4 lines, the way a man looks when a stranger says out loud the truest thing he has ever privately believed. The point was every scholar in that room hearing a nobody with no name speak the purest thing any of them had ever heard about their own calling and deciding on the spot permanently that I was one of them, that I was the real thing. a saint of the written word, wronged by the powerful, and that they would stand between me and anyone. I hadn't just bought a protector, I'd bought 10,000 of them in an afternoon, and they'd lined up to pay me for the privilege. Wei Hong and Lin Feng fled the tower with their tails between their legs, and out on the street, licking their wounds, they did the math that every enemy of mine eventually does and got the wrong answer in the most useful possible way. They remembered that this celebrated poet, for all his scholar friends, had been publicly disowned by the King of the North, cast out, cut off. No family would ever avenge him, and Kong Yunfeng couldn't very well stand guard over him every hour of every night, which meant they whispered to each other, delighted, their courage flooding back the moment they felt safe, that the famous Ye Yu could simply vanish on some dark road, quietly, and no one powerful would ever come asking where he'd gone. They decided to ambush me on the way home. That very night, they were so terribly pleased with the plan. I met them on the road they'd chosen, at the hour they'd chosen, because a man who keeps 4 experts in a cave hears things, and I had been rather hoping they'd try exactly this. They'd brought a proper party, guards, a pair of hired blades, the 2 patriarchs directing from the safe center of it, and they were watching the road ahead for a lone, frightened poet hurrying home in the dark. They should have watched the dark itself. I'll spare you the tactical particulars. A sword cultivator on an empty road at night, patient, unhurried, working from the outside in. It isn't really a fight. It's a subtraction. The hired blades went first and quietly, from the flanks, before they understood the poet had teeth. The guards broke and scattered when the men beside them kept not being there anymore, and by the time the moon was properly up, Wei Hong and Lin Feng were standing alone in the middle of the road they'd chosen to kill me on, back to back, turning at every sound, discovering that the frightened scholar had done all the frightening and saved none for himself. I stepped out of the black in front of them with my hands empty and my sword already sheathed, which unsettled them more than a drawn blade would have. "Evening, my lords," I said. "You came all this way looking for your sons. It seemed rude to send you home without them." I sealed them, slung them over my shoulders, and carried them down into the cave, and hung them up on fresh nails beside the 2 young men they'd crossed a province to find. "Surprise," I told the 4 of them, once the patriarchs had stopped sputtering and started understanding. "Family reunion. Wei Kuai, look, your father came all this way. Lin Chuan, yours too. Isn't that touching? I told you your families would come for you. Some of them really do. You should feel lucky. Not everyone gets that." The young ones wept. The old ones cursed. And the heavenly immortal brew, I am pleased to report, got noticeably richer that week because a patriarch's blood is aged blood, and aged blood makes a fuller, rounder body. 4 suppliers now, 2 generations of 2 families that had spent their whole lives deciding which children of no importance deserved to be beaten for sport, all of them, at last, contributing something the world could actually use. I went back up to the tower whistling. We had a grand opening in the morning, the real one, the one the whole world was coming to. And I had a feeling in my bones it was going to be a day people talked about for a very long time. I had no idea how right I was, or who was going to walk through my door before it was over. The grand opening of Yellow Crane Tower drew a guest list that had never been in one room before, and I stood at the top of my own staircase looking down at it and had to remind myself that 2 months ago I'd earned 2 spirit stones a month and slept in a place with more holes than roof. They all came. Both the great Confucian titans, Gu Ming, who'd nearly fainted at my first poem, and Bai Xingchen himself, the grand elder of the White Deer Academy, the old man who held my flower, come down in person to see the Poet Immortal, Kong Yunfeng, my new 8th realm attack dog, beaming like a proud uncle and already 3 cups into being everyone's favorite guest. Fairy Xinyu, cool and luminous at the best table by the water, with her maid Xiaoyu fussing beside her. He Qianyang, the Emperor's blood legend, taking a corner where he could watch all the exits and all the faces, because that is what careful legends do at parties. Half the important people in the Emperor's state packed wall to wall into a restaurant secretly owned by a wanted man and fronted by a bastard the Xiao family had thrown in the gutter, and Xiao Guang worked that floor like he'd been born on it. Watching him was its own show. He'd spent his whole life being sneered at by people like this, and now he moved among them pouring wine and dropping hints and being marvelously, maddeningly mysterious. And every time some silk-robed lord leaned in and asked, "Lo, who really makes this wine? Where does it come from? Name your price," Xiao Guang would smile like he was about to tell them, pour another cup instead, and drift away leaving the question hanging in the air. By the end of the night, half the province was convinced the Yellow Crane Tower's wine came from some reclusive immortal, which was, I suppose, close enough to true. I gave them their poem first. That was the plan. Feed the soul before you sell the wine. I walked to the great blank wall of my own tower in front of all of them, and I picked up the brush, and I wrote the one the place was named for. The old, aching, perfect one about a tower by a wide river, where long ago an immortal rode a yellow crane up into the clouds and never came back, and all that's left behind is the empty tower and the white clouds drifting on for 1,000 empty years, and a man standing at the rail at dusk, watching the river run and the mist come up off the water, staring at the far bank where his home is supposed to be, and knowing he can't get there from here. The homesickness of a person with nowhere left to be homesick for. I told you it was a little bit about me. Writing it in my own house, in front of the world, with my mother 40 miles away, tearing up cities looking for me, it was more than a little about me, and I felt it catch in my own chest a half beat before it hit the room. The heavens signed off. Light, weight, the by now familiar column of heaven and earth energy pouring down through my roof, but this time the sound the room made was different. My first poem had made scholars gasp. This one made them ache. A masterpiece about not being able to go home, written by the man the whole province was whispering had been thrown away by his own family in a restaurant named for the poem on its opening night. They weren't just impressed. They were undone. I watched a hall full of the most powerful people alive go quiet and shining-eyed all at once, and Gu Ming wept openly into his sleeve, and even He Qianyang in his careful corner sat very still for a long moment before he remembered to look unmoved, and Bai Xingchen stood up. The Grand Elder of the White Deer Academy crossed my floor in the hush, and every eye followed him, and he stopped in front of me and drew out a golden invitation, the kind they hand to maybe one genius a generation, the kind that skips every qualifying round and seats you straight in the finals of the great contest, and he pressed it into my hands with both of his. It would be an insult to the written word, he said, loud enough to carry to the last table, to make a talent like this wait in line behind children. Whatever else the contest decides, young Ye Yu sits in the final round. I would not have it any other way. The whole room understood exactly what it had just watched. The man in charge of guarding my flower had handed me a clear road straight to it, as a gift, in public, with 10,000 witnesses. I bowed to him, gracious and humble, the picture of a wronged scholar receiving his due, and behind my back I was already counting. Then we served the wine, and the night tipped from triumph into legend. The heavenly immortal brew went out in its tiered cups, the 10-stone pour for the merely rich, the 100-stone for the serious, the top-shelf 1,000-stone bottle for the handful of men who needed the whole room to watch them buy it. And Hanjiang's finest took their first careful sips, and Hanjiang's finest went down like wheat in a storm, grown masters giggling into their sleeves, a dignified sixth realm patriarch sliding thoughtfully beneath his own table and having to be helped up by his disciples, insisting the whole way that he was fine. He was merely resting his eyes at floor level. Kong Yunfeng leading a table of scholars in increasingly emotional toasts to virtue, poverty, and me. And Fairy Xinyu, cold, flawless sixth realm Fairy Xinyu, the most beautiful woman in the Emperor's state, lifted the top-shelf cup with 2 fingers, took one small, refined, absolutely ladylike sip, and stopped. Her cheeks went pink, her perfect eyes lost their focus and went soft and swimmy. The most beautiful woman in the world got quietly, elegantly, devastatingly tipsy off a single mouthful of my wine in front of the entire province, and had to be very carefully not looked at by a mortified Xiao Yu, who kept a steadying hand near her mistress's elbow and glared at anyone who dared to notice. One sip. I keep telling people, it's on the sign over the door. Even an immortal descending to earth gets 3, and the great fairy didn't make it past 1. The money came in so fast that Xiao Guang stopped being able to count it and started estimating in armfuls. 100,000 spirit stones an hour, he told me later, his hands actually shaking. In 1 hour I made 50 times what the old Ye Yu earned in his entire cold, miserable life. I stood at my rail above it all like the man in my own poem, except I wasn't aching for a home across the water. I was watching a fortune roll in on a tide of stolen verse and other men's blood, thinking, with real and uncomplicated satisfaction, that I was going to need a considerably bigger cave. 2 people in that room did their own private math instead of drinking. He Tianyang watched Bai Xingchen hand me that invitation, watched Kong Yunfeng hover over me like a war god uncle, felt again the shape of the hidden protector whose work had left his scouts dead without a mark, and I could see him, in his careful corner, quietly closing a door in his mind. Killing me was more trouble than it could possibly be worth right now. He shelved it. He was too intelligent for his own good, that one. A stupider man would have made his move that night, and I'd have had my Emperor blood vintage bottled by morning. And I, watching my 4-cage suppliers in my mind's eye and doing the arithmetic on 100 bottles a month, started turning over a nastier idea, a way to refine a captured enemy down past mere blood, down to a mindless, tireless, obedient thing that could work the brewery forever. No cursing, no clever escape attempts, no families showing up to ask questions. I filed it under soon, and under all of it, always, the same small warm coal I never quite let go cold. somewhere, someday, in front of exactly the right crowd, I was going to take my perfect golden little brother apart at the seams. Speaking of whom, 40 miles away, the machine I didn't yet know was aimed at me finally learned my face. Old Ye Wei the butler brought my parents fresh copies of the two poems, Bring in the Wine and Yellow Crane Tower, and told them plainly that the Poet Immortal the whole world had lost its mind over was their son, their worthless, thrown away, never had time to cultivate son. My father read verse he could not have produced in 1,000 years of trying, and could not make his face do anything at all. And my mother read the one about the crane, the one about a man who can't go home, and she understood it instantly and completely, the way only the person who locked the door can understand a poem about being locked out, and she read her son's homesickness in every single line and wept until the paper blurred and she couldn't see the words anymore. And my father, watching her cry over a poem, made the decision that tells you everything you need to know about him. He decided it was time to go and have a talk with me, a talk, man to man, in which, he was quite certain, his brilliant lost son would see reason, concede that he'd been rash, apologize for the murders and the disappearing and all the worry he'd caused, and come home at last to take his rightful place, now that it had turned out he was worth having after all. He was going to come to my tower and generously permit me to say sorry to him. I almost wish I'd known he was coming. I'd have chilled the good bottles and saved him a seat with a very good view. The old man came back that same night, and he came back wrong. I was closing up counting an obscene and frankly indecent amount of money when he walked into my tower, the drunk from the tavern, the one I'd given the free bottle to, except that a piece of him was missing. One arm, gone clean at the shoulder. His hair, iron gray the last time I'd seen him, had gone white as the snowfield I'd climbed out of. And there was something coming off him now that I knew on sight instantly in my gut because I'd been swimming in it for a solid week down in the abyss. The smell of death, close and patient and settled in. A man with not a great deal of clock left on the wall. He walked to a table and sat down like the sitting itself was hard work, and asked me with a tired little smile whether a paying customer might trouble the house for a cup of that famous wine. I poured him one, and I didn't charge him for it, and I asked what had happened to his arm. He waved the question off with his remaining hand, the way old men wave off a change in the weather they've decided not to discuss. I didn't know. That's the part I need you to feel with me here, because I've had a very long time to feel it since, and it doesn't get lighter. I did not know that only hours earlier this man had dragged a dying body up a road paved with killing arrays against the family that had crippled him a century before to knock on a door that would never open for anyone else alive. I did not know the arm was the price of it. I did not know the white hair was the price of it. I looked at a maimed old drunk and felt a vague, unharmonious tug of something. Pity, familiarity, that same nameless pull that had already stopped my hand once in the tavern. And I poured him his wine and made a light joke about him needing to pace himself better this time around. He drank, and then he tried to give me something. He started delicately, in the careful roundabout way that proud people use to offer help they don't want you to feel small for taking, to pass me his sword, not the weapon itself, the legacy, the understanding inside it, a whole lifetime of the highest sword Tao in 14 states, offered up to a young stranger he'd decided somewhere along the way was worth it, all of it dressed up as an old man rambling idly about technique so that I wouldn't have to notice I was being handed a fortune. He thought I was a hidden genius who'd suffered and endured, a diamond the careless world had buried in the mud, and he wanted, before the end, to leave his life's work somewhere it wouldn't simply die in the ground with him. And I, not knowing a single thing about any of it, just feeling, dimly, that I owed this particular old man something I couldn't put a name to, decided to show off for him instead, to hand him a little wonder before he went wherever he was so clearly, so soon, going. I showed him the sword, not the first stroke, the second one. The one I call divine punishment by one sword, the one where the whole world drains away to ink and blank paper, and the sky itself seems to pick up a brush and calmly pass sentence on everything beneath it, a stroke so total, so far past anything a fifth realm anything has any business producing, that when I let it bloom, quietly, in the empty tower, the very air went still and frightened around us. I only meant to impress him, to give a dying man a good story for the road. I did a great deal more than that. I watched 100 wasted years fall off the old man's face in a single breath. Because he'd been stuck, I'd learned all of this far too late, stuck for centuries just under the 10th realm, his heart of the sword cracked long ago, unable to make the final leap, slowly dying inside the gap between where he was and where he'd meant to end. And in my careless showing off, in a stroke I'd stitched together out of stolen poetry and demon instinct and a lonely child's raw need to finally be seen by somebody, he saw the exact thing he had been missing for 100 years. The true meaning of the sword, the shape of the door he'd been unable to find. I gave him, entirely by accident, showing off in a wine shop to a stranger, a real and genuine chance at surviving the death that was already reaching for him, a chance at the immortal realm he had long since given up ever reaching. We sat there, the two of us, in the quiet of my empty tower, a dying old master who had just been handed, out of nowhere, a reason to think he might live, and a thrown-away boy who had absolutely no idea he'd just done it. Each of us secretly, accidentally, saving the other's life across a small wooden table, and neither one of us saying a single word about it because he thought I didn't know what he'd done for me down in the dark, and I didn't know I had done anything for him at all. Then he paid me for the wine. He reached out with his one remaining hand, and he touched my forehead, gently, the way you'd touch something you were genuinely afraid of breaking, and I felt something sink in through the skin and settle, warm and alive and folded up impossibly small, behind my brow. A fire mulberry divine leaf, he called it, when I asked. A thing worth more than my whole tower and every drop of wine and stone in it. A single unbreakable promise that when my very worst day finally came, the day the whole world at last cornered me and I had nothing left in either sleeve, a power I had never met and never earned would step out of nowhere and save my life. Once. Absolutely. No matter who was swinging. He'd bought it, he said, with a small errand, payment for the wine. He made it sound like loose change he'd found in a pocket. I want to tell you, I understood, in that moment, the true size of the thing. I didn't. Not then. But I understood one thing, sitting there with that warmth settling in behind my eyes, and it went through me harder than any breakthrough ever had. It was the first gift anyone had ever given me, in either life, 40-some years across 2 whole worlds, and not one single person had ever handed me a thing and wanted nothing at all back for it. My entire first life had been invoices and expectations. My entire second life had been a family that spent fortunes on my brother and left me out in the cold to keep the accounts balanced. And here was a broken old drunk I'd known for the sum total of 2 conversations, dying on his feet in front of me, quietly pressing the single most precious thing he owned into a stranger's forehead, and calling it payment for a drink, so that I wouldn't have to feel, even for a second, like I'd been handed charity. I didn't say much. There wasn't any version of what I was feeling that would fit inside my mouth. He saved me the trouble of trying. "Walk your own road, child," he said, getting slowly to his feet. One arm, white hair, that patient death riding easy on his shoulders. I've watched a great many people walk a great many roads in my time. Most of them were walking somebody else's the whole way and never once knew it. Yours is yours. Even if 10,000 people never understand a step of it, even if the whole world lines up in front of you and calls you wrong to your face, you keep walking it. Somebody will be behind you. You won't always be able to see him back there, but he'll be there. Then he asked the only thing he ever asked me for. The next time we met, he said he'd like a poem, just a poem, nothing more. And he turned and walked out of my tower and into the dark, and I let him go, because I did not know that I was watching my own mother's father walk away from me, that the missing arm was mine, that the white hair was mine, that the whole impossible errand had been for me and me alone, and that somebody will be behind you wasn't a comfort at all. It was a plain statement of fact, a promise from a man who had already paid for it, in full, in advance, with everything he had left. I found all of it out much, much later. Long after it was too late to run out that door after him and say the one word I never got to say to anyone in this entire story. I stood in my empty tower for a while with a fortune stacked on the table and a warm leaf tucked behind my eyes, and for once, in either of my lives, I did not have a single joke ready to hand. Then I went back to counting the money, because a boy who's been cold his whole life doesn't know what to do with sudden warmth except get back to work before it fades on him. That's a flaw. I'm aware of it. I was working on it, slowly. Tomorrow the rest of them were coming. The loud ones. The ones who wanted things back from me. And I was ready for those. They came the next day, all of them. And I want to slow down here, because this is the part the whole story had been walking toward. This is the part where they cried and begged me to come back. You've heard the question. Here's the answer. I was out when they arrived. Xiaoguang met them, and my poor partner nearly lost his mind because standing in the doorway of our restaurant was the king of the north himself, Ye Shun, Ninth Realm, the man who stopped a million-strong invasion, with his whole retinue behind him and his wife at his side and my perfect little brother trailing after, all of them demanding to see the owner, demanding to see Ye Yu. Xiaoguang stalled and sweated and sent for me, and I finished what I was doing, in no hurry at all, and walked back into my own tower to find my family standing in it for the first time in my life. My mother saw me and broke. Su Meilin, 8th realm sword immortal, a woman who'd cut down armies without changing expression, came across that floor with her arms already open and tears already falling, saying my name, saying it over and over, reaching to pull me into her the way you'd reach for something you thought the river had taken. 20 years of not reaching, all arriving at once. I stepped back out of her hands. I watched her fingers close on air, and I watched what that did to her face, and I kept my voice as level and as polite as a closed door. Your Highness, I said, please, have some self-respect. Your Highness, not mother, not mom. The thing you call a stranger of rank. I watched the word go into her like a blade going in slow, and she stopped where she stood with her arms still half raised, and something in the great sword immortal's chest came apart that no sword had ever touched. She whispered. I'm your mother. You're the wife of a prince who had a son he found inconvenient, I said, and left in the cold for 20 years and remembered the month he started writing poems worth money. I don't have a mother, Your Highness. I had a farmer's widow who fed me when your family wouldn't, and she's been dead for years, and I buried her myself, and none of you sent flowers. So, what can Yellow Crane Tower get you? We do a very fine wine. First cups on the house, for royalty. My father tried next, and he tried the only way he knew how, which was as a king. He drew himself up and he told me, with the patience of a man being extremely generous, that he understood I was angry, that a lot had been said in haste, that it was time to stop this performance and come home and take my rightful place as his eldest son. And that if I would simply acknowledge I'd been rash, the murders, the disappearing, the worry I'd caused my mother, then all of it could be set aside and forgotten. He came to my tower to let me apologize to him. I almost admired it. You have to build a very specific kind of man to stand in the wreckage he made and wait for the thank you. Set aside and forgotten, I repeated. That's generous. Tell me, Your Highness, the 20 years. Do we set those aside too, or just the recent unpleasantness? Because I'd hate to forget the wrong parts. That's when my little brother decided he'd heard enough. Yahao had been standing there the whole time watching the family he'd always owned outright crawl after the brother who was supposed to be nothing, and it was more than his golden pride could hold. He moved, fast, genius fast, all those elixirs and all that favoritism packed into one furious palm aimed at my chest. And I heard him say it, the same thing he'd said the day he struck me in the family hall. He started it, so I won't hold back. He should have held back. I'd let him hit me once, weeks ago, when I was a first realm nobody choking on my own blood. I was not that anymore. I stepped inside the palm like it was standing still, and I drove my knee up into him once, and I felt his ribs give. An event, a sound, a genius folding around a single strike, and the great young saint of the immortal mountain left his feet and hit the floor of my restaurant and did not bounce. And then, because I am a professional, and this was theater, I slapped myself, hard, across the mouth, quick, so a little blood came, so it would look. To a father primed his whole life to believe it. Like the exchange had cost me too. I wanted to run an experiment. I wanted to see, in front of witnesses, which son the King of the North reached for on instinct. He passed the experiment perfectly. Ye Shun's head snapped toward me, and the first thing out of the mouth of the man who'd come to bring me home, the very first thing, before he knew a single fact, was, "You would harm your own brother? Not are you hurt, not both my sons are bleeding." Ye Hao was on the ground with his ribs caved, and I had blood on my lip, and my father looked at the wreckage and instinctively, helplessly, in front of the whole world, took the golden boy's side out of pure reflex. I smiled. I actually felt the thing I'd been chasing since the day he told me to kneel finally click shut, clean and quiet. "Thank you," I said. "That's all I needed. You just answered every question I've ever had, Your Highness, and you did it faster than I hoped." Then I looked down at Ye Hao, groaning on my floor, and I said the thing I'd been saving. "Look at you. 20 years of the finest pills and elixirs in the North Sea, the best masters, every door held open, every enemy cleared out of your path, and this is the result. You know, if they'd fed all of that to a pig, the pig would be an immortal by now. It would at least be grateful. They poured a kingdom's fortune into you and made a loud, brittle boy who can't take one knee without crying for his father. You're not worth a single hair on my head, little brother. You never were. The tragedy of your life is that you're the only one who didn't know it." I watched it land. I watched 20 years of being told he was the best of everything meet the truth all at once in a public room, and I watched something structural break behind his eyes, the thing that holds a spoiled genius up, the belief that he was chosen. It went out of him. And Ye Hao, who had never in his life been anything but the treasure, could not survive being nothing for even a moment, and in his shame he turned his own hand against himself, right there, reaching to end the unbearable thing his life had just become. My mother caught it. My mother, who had watched me step out of her arms and call her Your Highness and had not moved, crossed that floor faster than thought and slapped Yahao across the face and screamed at him, "You would repay us by dying. How dare you, after everything we've given you," and pulled him into her and held him and wept over the son on the floor. And I stood there and watched her do it, and I felt nothing sharp about it at all, only the old quiet cold, the confirmation of a thing I'd always known. There it was, in the open. The reflex works one way. When the golden son reaches to hurt himself, the mother moves like lightning. When the thrown-away son gets called Your Highness by his own child, the mother's arms just close on air. I didn't hate her for it. You can't hate water for running downhill. I just finally got to see the hill. The room was silent. And it was not a small room, and it was not an unimportant silence. My 4 captive suppliers' families had come too, by the way, frantic, demanding their vanished sons and their vanished patriarchs back from a city that kept quietly swallowing their people whole. I'll get to them. Kong Yunfeng was watching, and behind him a hall's worth of scholars. Fairy Xinyu was watching from her table with her cup forgotten in her hand. Half the important people in the entire province were packed into my tower, and every single one of them had just watched a crown prince step out of his mother's arms and call her by her title, and put his golden brother on the floor and refuse a king to his face. This was not a private family quarrel behind a closed door. This was the king of the north losing, in public, at the one thing he'd never lost at, in front of everyone whose opinion he'd spent a lifetime commanding. And my father stood in the middle of all of it, and something in him that had never once bent in his entire towering life, not for enemies, not for kings, not for the heavens themselves, began, slowly, terribly, in front of the whole watching world, to bend. Yi Shun lowered his head. I need you to understand what that was, because the whole room did, and it was the thing they'd remember longest. This was a man who had never bowed to anyone, not to enemies, not to kings, not to the heavens. And he lowered his proud head in front of the whole world to his cast-off son, and he asked me, in a voice with all the king scraped out of it, quiet, almost pleading, "Have you thought it through? You really won't come back with us?" The first time Yashun ever bowed his head in his life. There it was. The crying, the begging, the come back with us. Everything the title promises. Everything 20 years should have earned and never did, arriving now, in my restaurant, too late by exactly 1 lifetime. I looked at my father's bowed head for a moment, and I gave him the only answer that was ever going to fit. I smiled, faint and easy, the way you smile at a customer who's leaving. "Your Highness," I said, "please take care of yourselves." That was all. No speech, no list of grievances. I'd already said everything with 1 word an hour ago, and the word was Highness. He'd bowed his head, and it had bought him nothing, because some things aren't for sale anymore by the time you finally bring money, and my father was learning that in public, at his age, from his son. Behind him, my mother, still holding the wrong child, said the thing that I think haunts her to this hour. She didn't ask me to come home. She'd given up that much. She just said, so quietly I barely caught it, to no one, to the floor, to 20 lost years. "I only want to hear him call me Mom. One time, just once before I die." I heard it. I want to be honest with you, since I've been honest this whole way. I heard it, and it touched something. I'm not made of stone, whatever the wine says. But touching something and moving it are different distances, and she'd left me out in the cold too long to close that gap with 1 sentence in a room full of witnesses. So I turned around, and I went back to work in the tower I built out of everything they threw away, and I let my family show themselves out. You asked why they cried and begged me to come back. They cried and begged me to come back because I built something they couldn't ignore, and because grief is the only language that House ever learned to speak, and because it is always, always easier to weep for what you've lost than to have simply not thrown it away. And I didn't go back. That's the other half of the answer, and it's the half they never put in the question. The Lin and Wei families were the last loose problem, and they solved themselves, the way problems tend to once you've built a wall of scholars around your house. They'd worked out by now that Han Jiang had swallowed 2 of their young masters whole, and then, when the patriarchs came looking, quietly swallowed the patriarchs too, and a family that keeps feeding its people into a hole in the ground eventually gets loud and desperate about it. So the rest of the Lin and Wei seniors descended on my tower in a mob, furious, certain the disowned poet was somehow at the bottom of all their missing kin, pressing in with threats and demands and pointed fingers. And Kong Yunfeng stood up, and behind him, 100 scholars stood up, a dozen of them 6th realm and higher, an entire Confucian congregation deciding, as one body, in one motion, that no arrogant noble clan was going to lay so much as a fingertip on their beloved Poet Immortal. You could actually watch the Lin and Wei men do the arithmetic, count the room, and arrive at the only sane answer available, which was later. They retreated, promising loudly that this was very far from over, and I thanked my defenders the way I thank everyone who does me a good turn. I opened the good bottles and treated every scholar in the house to the heavenly immortal brew, which cost me nothing but a little more from the cellar and bought me another 1,000 men who'd cheerfully die on my doorstep. Best marketing budget in the world, the cellar. Never misses. That night the families made their real mistake, the one they didn't walk back from. They left watchers on me, quiet, experienced experts, posted in the dark to track my movements, find my routines, learn where I slept and when I walked alone. Good watchers. By morning, they were dead. All of them. Cleanly, silently, without a single mark anyone could trace, without a witness, without a sound that woke a neighbor. And I hadn't lifted one finger. Somewhere out in the dark, a quiet man named Lin Yi, the same one the old drunk had once told to keep my parents off my trail. The grandfather's man, a protector I didn't know I possessed, guarding a grandson he wasn't permitted to name, had simply methodically erased every eye the Lin and Wei families had put on me and melted back into the crowd before dawn. I woke up to reports that all my enemy's surveillance had evaporated overnight, and I did the only appropriate thing under the circumstances, which was mourn. Such a waste, I sighed, reading the reports over breakfast. Do you have any idea how much good wine was walking around inside those experts? Somebody killed my inventory in the night and didn't even leave me the bodies. I hope they're pleased with themselves. Xiaoguang looked at me across the table like a man who wasn't entirely sure I was joking. I was, unfortunately for his peace of mind, mostly not, and I think that landed because he stopped asking. Fairy Xinyu had watched the whole 2 days unfold, the family scene, the icy, Your Highness, the knee I put into my brother's ribs, the wall of scholars rising up around me, and instead of being frightened off, she was getting interested in the specific, dangerous, downhill way that spells nothing but trouble for everyone eventually involved. Her little maid Xiao Yu was beside herself over it, whispering urgent warnings that the young miss appeared to be developing genuine feelings for a man who might very well turn out to be some sort of devil. The maid was, as it happens, entirely correct on both counts, which is more than most worried maids can say. I always liked that girl. Excellent instincts, wasted on people who wouldn't listen. Then it was time for the contest itself, and we all went up the mountain. The White Deer Academy held its grand competition on a vast platform floating in the clouds above the peak, and the whole world that mattered was seated on it. Every Holy Land's brightest young stars, the great Confucian titans, the fairies, the living legends, my parents among the honored guests in the front, my brother beside them with his ribs freshly mended and his pride distinctly not. And a new face, seated front and center, glaring open daggers at me before I'd even found my cushion. Liu Yuanchang, holy son of the Fuguang Cave Heaven, a genius of real and genuine rank. And this is the part that made me sit up straight and pay close attention, a young man born with divine bones. An actual heaven-blessed physique, the kind of once-in-an-era bloodline that the demon codex living in my skull practically began to salivate over the moment I laid eyes on him. Because a set of divine bones was exactly, precisely, one of the two things I still needed to forge the true demon god body. The twin spirit flower was the prize sitting locked in its case on the table. And the second ingredient had just walked in on its own 2 legs, worn as a skeleton by an arrogant young man who happened to be my little brother's dearest and closest friend, and who had come here today, he announced to anyone within earshot, expressly to teach the upstart Yeyu a hard lesson on Yehao's behalf. He thought he'd come to punish me, he'd come to make a donation. I looked at Liu Yuanchang, and I saw the very last item on my shopping list stand up, square its shoulders, and volunteer for the role, and I had to work genuinely hard to keep my face arranged into something polite. My father, meanwhile, sat there getting steadily worked over by 100 sycophants, all of whom had suddenly, miraculously, always believed in his brilliant eldest son, and something in Ye Shun had gone tired and gray and quiet since the scene at my tower. At one point he leaned over to my mother and murmured, low, that perhaps it was time they let go. That perhaps the boy had made his choice, clearly and finally, and they ought to let him have it. My mother didn't answer him. She hadn't really spoken since the tower. She just watched me, steadily, across the entire cloud platform, with an expression I chose deliberately, not to read too closely, because I had work to do, and I couldn't afford what reading it might cost me. Fairy Xinyu made her move before the poetry had even properly started, and she made it, in part, to wound another woman. She came and greeted me formally, warmly, publicly, in front of absolutely everyone, drawing every eye on the platform to the fact that the realm's great cold beauty was singling out the disowned poet for her attention, and she did it while standing at precisely the angle where Lianhua could see all of it, because Xinyu had decided, somewhere over the last 2 days, that needling the frosty little saintess was a delightful way to spend a morning, and that I made a wonderfully sharp needle. She asked me, sweet as spring water, loud enough to carry 3 rows back, about my former betrothed, whether I still thought of her at all. So I gave them a poem. They'd all climbed a mountain for poetry. They could have some. I stood, and I spoke a few soft lines about a man returning home to find the flowers of his childhood streets in full and glorious bloom, and himself arrived at entirely the wrong season for them, too late to be anything to that place now, but a stranger passing through, gentle, wistful, lovely on its surface. And the whole platform heard the surface of it and sighed, moved, a ripple of appreciation running through the seats. And then the sharper ones among them began to hear the rest of it, the thing swimming underneath, because I wasn't finished. I gave them the other line. The bitter one, the knife under the silk, about how a man can lift up his whole heart, freely and completely, and offer it to the bright moon hanging pure and cold in the sky, ask for nothing, hold nothing back, and the bright moon, unmoved and untouched, chooses instead to pour all of its silver light down into the gutter, a heart raised up towards something pure, its light spent, deliberately, on the ditch. You could feel it move through the crowd, row by row, a rising whisper, because they were decoding it in real time, right there in their seats. The bright moon, the heart offered up and refused. The season arrived too late to matter. They knew the story. Everyone knew the whole story by now. The disowned prince, once betrothed to the saintess Lianhua, the saintess who had wanted the golden younger brother instead. And here was the poet, laying it all out in verse built to outlast every person on that mountain, telling the entire world without ever once speaking a name. I offered up my whole heart to a woman, and she chose to spend her light on my brother, who was the gutter. Lianhua sat in that crowd and felt every single eye on the platform. Find her, and understand. And the color drained clean out of her face, and the private guilt she'd been carrying for weeks finished, right there, in public, in front of everyone, turning into a brand she would wear openly for the rest of her natural life. Xinyue watched her burn, and looked quietly, thoroughly satisfied with her morning's work. I felt a small flicker about it, I'll admit that much. It's an ugly thing to do to a person, even a person who's earned every inch of it. But I've found over 2 lifetimes that ugly things done to people who've genuinely earned them go down a great deal easier than the alternative, and I was, at that particular moment, fresh out of mercy for anyone whose name appeared anywhere in that story. Liu Yuanchang, watching me carve up his best friend's chosen love with 2 lines of verse and a smile, couldn't stand it 1 second longer. He shot to his feet and threw down every challenge in the book at once, called me a fraud, a lucky nobody, a jumped-up wine merchant hiding like a coward behind a skirt of scholars, and demanded, loudly, that I answer him like a man, in a duel, in the arena, right here, right now, in front of the whole world. I looked at him, this gift, this walking, talking, glaring ingredient, so desperately eager to be used. You want to fight me? I said, mild as milk. Sure, happy to, but let's not waste the whole platform's morning watching just the 2 of us dance around, You came all this way for Ye Hao, and Ye Hao's been dying to finish what he started ever since I put him down on the floor of my own restaurant. So here's my offer, holy son. I let the smile climb all the way up my face, past the point where it stops being friendly. Why bother fighting just one of you? Bring my darling little brother up here too. I'll take the pair of you at once. Save us all some time and give the crowd their money's worth. The platform erupted, and high up in the clouds at the judge's seat, Bai Xingchen, the grand elder, the man who held my flower, leaned forward with the delighted, slightly appalled expression of a very old man who has just realized the show is going to be so much better than anything he'd been promised on the program. Bai Xingchen waved a hand and folded a piece of the sky into an arena, a bubble of void hanging over the platform, sealed so nothing that happened inside could hurt the crowd and nothing the crowd did could reach inside. 2 against 1. My brother, ribs healed and hatred fresh, and Liu Yuanchang with his divine bones and his righteous fury, and me, with my hands behind my back and a small bottle in my sleeve. The platform loved it before it started. 10,000 geniuses and elders leaning forward, the fairies at their high tables, my parents rigid in the seats of honor, and a low roar of side bets running through the crowd. Nobody betting on me, by the way, which suited me fine. The odds are always best on the horse everyone's decided is glue. Any last words, wine merchant? Liu Yuanchang called, rolling his shoulders, holy light already crawling up his arms. Ye Hao's told me all about you. The disowned one. The embarrassment. I'm going to enjoy sending you back to your tavern in pieces. That's a lot of talking for a man who came here to lose in front of his idol, I said, and I clasped my hands behind my back and I did not draw a sword. Come on then, both of you. I've got a restaurant to reopen by dinner. They came at me together, and I want to describe the next part accurately because it's the most fun I'd had since I got to this world. I didn't hit them. Not at first. I walked. I strolled around the inside of that arena with my hands clasped behind my back like a man inspecting a garden, and I let them throw everything they had at the space where I'd just been. Ye Hao led with the genius palm strike that had once put the old Ye Yu on his knees. Perfect form, tremendous power, a technique worth a small fortune in pills and instruction, and it passed through the exact spot my head had occupied a quarter second earlier and met nothing but air. Liu Yuanchang came high with a lance of divine light meant to pin me to the floor of the world. I tilted my head. It went past my ear close enough to warm it. Left, I murmured behind Ye Hao's shoulder, and he whirled and struck and hit nothing. Too slow. Now right. I was behind Liu Yuanchang before the word finished, and his elbow cut back through empty space. All so slow. You know, for the two brightest talents of the age, you are remarkably easy to be nowhere near. They stopped coordinating and started competing, which is what happens when you embarrass proud men. They forget the plan and start each trying to be the one who lands the blow. Ye Hao overcommitted. Liu Yuanchang got in his way. For one glorious second, the two greatest young geniuses in the world tangled their own feet up chasing me, and the crowd, despite itself, laughed, a short, startled, involuntary laugh at the sight of the golden saint of the immortal mountain and the holy son of the Fuguang cave heaven bumping shoulders like drunks reaching for the same cup. Ye Hao heard the laugh, and it did something to his face I'll treasure forever. Stand still, he screamed, and threw out his family's proudest art, a lattice of light meant to lock down a whole region of space so I'd have nowhere left to slip. Fine. If he wanted me to stand still, I'd stand still. I stopped, right in the middle of his lattice, and I picked up a brush. That's the second sword, the one I'd shown the old drunk in the empty tower, the one where the world turns to ink and paper, and I get to write the ending. I dragged it across the air, and the arena went black around them, a domain of pure shadow ink where up and down stopped meaning anything, where their own light guttered like candles dropped in a well, where every strength they had folded back toward its owner. Ye Hao's lattice collapsed inward. Liu Yuanchang's holy fire dimmed to an ember. The two of them stood in a darkness I'd painted, and I walked through it like it was noon. You feel that? I asked, conversational, circling. That heavy, drowning, nothing feeling? That's what my whole life felt like in your family's house, little brother. Every single day for 20 years, I just learned how to paint it on the walls. I let a stroke of one sword to slay immortals come down out of the false black sky, and it took Ye Hao off his feet and skidded him across a floor that wasn't there. Doesn't suit you. You've got the wrong face for it. It's a losing face. I'd know. I wore your family's version of it long enough, and that's when my mother broke the one rule the arena had. Because it had become clear, really unmistakably clear, to every eye on that platform, that her golden son was about to be taken apart in the dark by the boy she'd thrown away. Su Meilin moved. An 8th realm sword immortal reached her power straight through Bai Xingqin's sealed arena, against every law of the contest, a wall of sword force punching into my ink domain to shield Ye Hao, and it caught me flat, mid-stroke, unprepared for an attack from outside the rules of the game, and for the first time all day, I took a real hit. It cracked my domain. It put copper on my lips that I hadn't put there myself, and drove me back 3 steps. The arena went silent. Then it went ugly, because they'd all seen it. The whole cloud platform, every holy land, both Confucian titans, watched the great king's wife cheat, reach into a sealed student duel, and break the sacred rules of the White Deer Academy, to spare her darling boy a fair loss to the son she'd abandoned. And these were people who had already heard Your Highness ring across my tower, already heard the poem about the moon spending its light on the gutter, already watched a father instinctively defend the wrong child. The murmur that rose out of them was not on her side. It was low, and it was disgusted, and it spread. She interfered, in a sealed arena, for the younger, against her own eldest. Again, have they no shame, that family? I stood there with copper on my mouth and let every person on that mountain get a long, clear look at it. Keep going, I thought. Please. You are doing my work for me, and doing it better than I ever could. Nothing I could say would damn you like the crowd watching you damn yourselves. Then I stopped playing, because I'd made my point, and I had a delivery to collect. I tipped the little bottle from my sleeve and drank. The heavenly immortal brew went down, and the bloodthirsty demon god came up roaring, and my strength didn't double. It multiplied, the whole ruined arena flushing red at the edges as I went from toying to terrifying between one breath and the next. Ye Hao's mother had bought him a few more seconds of dignity and spent her own to do it, and I took those seconds back with interest. I crossed the distance before he saw me move, and I put him down. Not dead, this was a contest, but broken, comprehensively, folded onto his knees, coughing in the red light in front of the parents who'd just shredded the rules of heaven for him and failed anyway. I crouched, so only he could hear. They broke the laws of the sky itself to save you, I told him softly, and you still lost. To me. To the one they left in the cold. Sit with that, little brother. Really sit in it. You are the boy they'll burn down the world to protect, and you still aren't worth the fire. You never were. That's not my curse on you. That's just the receipt. Whatever was left of Ye Hao's pride after the tower finished going out of him right there on his knees. You could watch it leave, the way you can watch a lamp go out across a dark field. He'd been the treasure his whole life, and he was learning, in public, at the worst possible altitude, that the treasure was only ever the setting, and he was not the stone. That left Liu Yuanchang, and Liu Yuanchang, to his eternal credit, did the exact thing that made my whole day easy. Cornered, humiliated, watching a saint get folded up like laundry, refusing to be next, he reached for his trump, his divine bloodline, his once-in-an-era heaven-blessed physique, and he pulled all of it to the surface at once and wrapped himself in a domain of burning sky, a roaring shroud of holy white fire meant to turn me to ash where I stood. It was, genuinely, a magnificent technique. 1,000 years of a blessed bloodline in one desperate blaze. It also, very conveniently, swallowed the two of us whole and hid us completely from every single eye on that platform. I walked into his own fire, straight into the white glare where nobody could see a thing, close as a man leaning in to share a secret, and I called up the demon path. The art of illusion and hollowing the codex in my skull had been keeping warm for exactly this occasion, and I did the quiet work. I won't dress it up and I won't draw it out. When a demon takes the thing that makes a man special, there's no wound to point at afterward and no scream anyone remembers. There's only a before and an after. Before, a holy sun blazing with divine bones the heavens handed out once an era. After, a confused, dimmed young man swaying in a dying fire, hollow somewhere he couldn't name, staring at his own hands and wondering why the sky had suddenly moved so far away. His precious physique was simply, cleanly, permanently mine, folded away in my sleeve next to the empty bottle, and he never once felt the hand that took it because his own trump card had been the curtain I did it behind. The burning sky guttered out. Liu Yuanchang stood swaying in the settling ash, a husk that still looked like a genius from the outside, and the Fuguang elders rushed the broken arena and gathered up their holy son, murmuring about how ferociously he'd fought, how cruelly the upstart had beaten him, never once suspecting that the thing that made him worth carrying home had already left the mountain in my pocket. I let myself look appropriately winded. I'd cracked a fresh blood pack behind my back while the fire was still up, and I was already knitting whole again, better than new, but the platform didn't need to know that, any more than it needed to know the rest. 2 ingredients. That is what that arena was really about, under all the theater. I'd walked in needing divine bones and a flower to forge the true demon god body. I walked out with the bones sealed in my sleeve, my brother's spirit in pieces on the floor, my parents disgraced in front of the entire world by their own hands, and exactly 1 item left on the shopping list. High at her table, Fairy Xinyu watched me climb out of that arena bloodied and smiling, and I could feel it from across the platform, was not frightened at all. Her maid Xiao Yu looked ready to faint. The young miss looked like a woman who just decided the dangerous thing was worth it. I filed that under later too. Bai Xingchen rose, delighted and appalled and thoroughly, helplessly entertained, and announced to the platform that the grand contest would come down to a single final round, and that the prize I'd crossed 2 lives in a forbidden abyss and a poetry-mad city to reach, would be the twin spirit flower, awarded to whoever could write the single greatest work of the day, a poetry contest, for the last thing I needed, against a field of geniuses I'd already gutted, hollowed, or humiliated. I cracked my knuckles and tried very hard to look humble, which has never once worked on my face and did not start now. The final round had a theme. They'd raised a great new pavilion on the mountain for the occasion, all fresh timber and painted eaves against the clouds, and the last poem of the contest was to be written in its honor. Whoever praised it best took the flower, and nobody would pick up a brush. That's how thoroughly I'd rattled the field. Every genius left on that platform had heard "Bring in the Wine," seen Yellow Crane Tower hanging in my own hall, watched me carve up a saintess with 2 lines of verse and hollow out a holy sun, and toy with the 2 brightest prodigies of the age at once, and not one of them wanted to be the fool who stood up, wrote something merely excellent, and had it measured in front of the whole world against whatever I was about to do. So they sat there, the finest young talents alive, and they fidgeted, and they studied their own sleeves, and they waited for the upstart wine merchant to go first, so they'd at least know the exact size of the thing they were losing to, so I went first. It's only polite. I want you to understand what I reached for, because this time it wasn't a poem, it was the poem. On my first world, there was a young man named Chen Ziang who, at a banquet in a tower very much like this one, at barely more than a boy's age, stood up and improvised a preface so perfect that 13 centuries later, school children still had to memorize it, and grown scholars still quietly agreed no one had ever done it better. The one with the line every single person knows, even if they know nothing else about poetry. The lone wild duck rising against the burning glow of the evening, and the autumn river and the endless sky washed together into one seamless color so that you cannot find the seam where the water stops and heaven begins. A whole golden afternoon of light and distance and youth and doomed brilliance, folded up into a handful of characters by a boy showing off at a party he wasn't important enough to be seated well at. I gave it to them. All of it. In a new pavilion on a mountain in the clouds, in front of every important person alive, I wrote down the finest thing any human being on any world I had ever seen had written about the simple act of looking at a view. And this time the heavens did not merely approve. This time they came down. The sky over White Deer Mountain tore fully open, not the tidy vortex of my first poem, but something vast and bright behind it, an ocean of heaven and earth energy far too much for any one body to hold, pouring down onto the platform in a column you could have seen from the next province. Every rival's brush froze mid-air in their fingers, ink drying on the tip, because there was simply no longer any point. The contest had been over since the second line, and everyone on the mountain knew it. And then the impossible thing happened, the thing that nobody, least of all me, saw coming. Bai Xingqian broke through. The Grand Elder of the White Deer Academy had been stuck at the very peak of the 9th realm for 10,000 years, right at the wall of the immortal realm, one step from the 10th, unable to make it, aging in place at the roof of the world. And my preface, the sheer raw force of a true masterpiece being born in front of him, the heavens themselves roaring their agreement, cracked that 10,000-year wall like an egg dropped on stone. The old man ascended on the spot, in front of the entire assembled world. 10 millennia of patient failure ended by a borrowed poem, and the light of the 10th realm rolled off him in slow, enormous waves that pressed every head on the platform down toward the floor. And then, overflowing, weeping, overwhelmed with a gratitude too big for his newly immortal body to contain, Bai Xingqian did the thing that changed what I am. He turned to me, and he took all of that surplus, a lifetime, 10,000 years of accumulated Confucian merit, the pure raw stuff of the written way, the overflow of an ascension I had caused, and he poured it into me, a gift. The way a rising tide lifts the little boat that raised it. It flooded into my body, and my body, being the strange two-path thing it is, caught it and forged something out of it that nearly made me laugh out loud right there on the sacred platform. A saintly body, a holy physique, the pure, luminous, righteous foundation of the greatest true scholars in the world, growing quietly inside the body of a demon cultivator who kept 4 men on nails in a cave and refined their blood into the wine these very people were drunk on. Do you remember, all the way back at the start, when I first put on the Devouring Heaven demon art, the one that looks holy and righteous on the outside while it silently eats everything it touches, and I joked that I was technically, basically a saint? I'd been calling myself a saint as a running gag for 2 solid months, and the heavens, with a sense of humor I honestly hadn't credited them with, chose that exact moment to make it literally, structurally true. 2 paths in one skin now, the demon underneath, the saint on top, both of them completely and equally real. I had become, officially and cosmically, the most honest liar in the world. Bai Xingqian, radiant and streaming tears and newly, gloriously immortal, came down through his own light and pressed the twin spirit flower into my hands himself with both of his and named me champion of the grand contest and told the whole platform in a voice like a struck bell that in 10,000 years he had never once met a talent like mine and did not expect to meet another before the world ended. My parents sat in the seats of honor and watched their disowned, worthless, no time to cultivate eldest son be crowned the single greatest young genius alive by a man who had just become an immortal because of him. My mother had a hand pressed over her mouth. My father had no expression left in his face to make. The flower, the last ingredient, sitting warm in my palm. They named the new pavilion the Tengwang Tower after the preface that had christened it, and Bai Xingqian, still glowing, decreed on the spot that it would stand forever as a free academy, a place where poor scholars with no family name and no coin could come and learn for nothing the way he himself once couldn't. Which was so precisely, so exactly the thing my 4 sage lines had promised a true scholar was for that the whole crowd wept all over again, and I stood there holding my flower and thinking about the strange fact that the truest things I had ever said in this entire world were poems I'd stolen off dead men to help me sell wine. It didn't make the things less true. That's the part I've never quite managed to work out, and I've had a long time to try. The Lin and Wei families gave me my parting gift on the way down the mountain. They ambushed me, the whole remaining strength of both clans, desperate and furious, certain this was their last chance to get the rootless devil who had swallowed their sons and their patriarchs and left them with nothing. They poured out of the tree line and surrounded me on the mountain road, blades up, elders at the front, and I let them do it. I let them close the whole circle, and then I gave the performance of my 2 lives. I did not fight. I stood in the middle of their bared steel, empty-handed, and I called out, wounded and noble, and pitched to carry all the way up to the descending crowd of scholars behind me, that I was a lone man with no family and no protector, that these 2 great and ancient clans had persecuted me from the start for the single unforgivable crime of being born poor, and that if my death was what their wounded pride required, then by all means, let them have it, that I would sooner fall on my own sword, here, now, than go on living one more day in a world where noble blood was allowed to hunt a wronged scholar for sport. and I raised my own blade to my own throat, slowly, believe me, theatrically slowly, slow enough that 100 horrified witnesses would have every chance in the world to rush forward and stop me. I was never in the slightest actual danger, not for 1 second. I had a life-saving divine leaf sealed behind my brow, a demon's constitution, a saint's body, and both sleeves full of tricks. It was theater, top to bottom, floor to rafters, pitched at exactly one audience. That audience arrived precisely on schedule. Kong Yun Feng, roaring down the mountain like weather. 10,000 scholars who had adopted me as the living soul of their whole calling, surging after him. And descending through the clouds above them all like the wrath of heaven made flesh, newly ascended immortal Bai Xingchen, who took one single look at 2 arrogant noble clans, driving his beloved Poet Immortal to raise a blade to his own throat, and lost his temper in the 10th realm. I'll give you the result and spare you the rooms, the same as I always do. When a freshly minted immortal decides 2 proud clans have forfeited their right to go on existing, the matter is brief and it is total, and the mountain is very quiet afterward. The Lin and Wei families, who had spent generations of their long lives carefully deciding which children of no importance deserved to be beaten for the fun of it, stopped, cleanly and permanently, being a problem that anyone would ever have to think about again. And I, standing rescued and vindicated and holy in the eyes of 10,000 weeping witnesses, the wronged scholar the heavens themselves kept reaching down to save, allowed myself exactly one small private thought, and the thought was grief. All that blood, I sighed, very, very quietly, watching 2 entire clans worth of rich, powerful, perfectly good essence go up into the sky and out of the world. 2 whole families of premium stock gone, and I didn't get a single bottle out of the lot. Do you have any idea what an aged Wei patriarch vintage would have fetched? This is a genuine tragedy. Somebody ought to write a poem about it. Beside me, Xiao Guang made a small strangled sound, like a man deciding permanently never to ask his boss what he means by things. I walked back down into Hanjiang, a saint, untouchable, beloved, the wronged. Scholar the immortals themselves kept saving, protected by a 10th realm master, and worshipped by every poor man who'd ever memorized a line. My parents left the mountain for the far north not long after, quiet and diminished, a king and a sword immortal walking home with their hands empty, though my mother, I heard, refused to go the whole way. She stopped at the very edge of the region and simply stayed there, as close as she could get to me without crossing the last mile, unwilling to let the final distance close between us. I had the flower, I had the bones, I had a fortune, an army of scholars, an immortal's blessing, and a body that ran on 2 impossible paths at the same time. It was time to go back down into the dark and become the thing the system had promised me on the very first day. I went back down into the abyss, my abyss, the tomb of certain death that had turned out to be the safest place in the world for a man like me, and in the cave where it all started, I finally cashed in everything I'd bled for. The twin spirit flower, Liu Yuancheng's divine bones, the recipe the demon codex had been dangling in front of me since the day I chose the 3rd door. I brewed them together into the thing they call the blood-refining soup, and I drank it, and I forged the demon god body, the real one, the full inheritance, the whole point of the 3rd choice. It nearly took me apart putting it together. That's how you know it's real. The good ones always try to kill you on the way in. The flower fought the bones fought the blood, all 3 of them fought me, and for a long, ugly stretch in the dark, I genuinely wasn't sure which of us was going to win. But when it finally settled, when the war inside my own chest went quiet and the new thing cooled and set, I opened my eyes at the 6th realm. The 6th, from a 1st realm nobody just 2 months ago, from the toilet of the profession, from a boy on his knees on a golden floor being told to kneel lower, and there was a fire living in me now that had not been there before. A heaven-burning flame, the codex called it, a fire the notes promised could melt the sky itself given enough fuel to burn. I called a little of it up onto my palm and watched it eat the darkness of the cave and throw no smoke, and I thought about how far a thing like that could travel and what it could travel through. I sat there a long while, just breathing, feeling the power move through the 2 paths at once, the demon underneath and the saint on top, the truth and the mask, both of them equally and completely real. And for the first time in either of my 2 lives, I felt like the size of me on the inside finally matched the size of the things I meant to go and do. Then I dealt with the staffing. 4 suppliers had been hanging in that cave for weeks. The 2 Wei men, the 2 Lin men, 2 generations of 2 families that had spent their lives teaching a poor boy that the world hurts you for free. Their families were gone now, wiped off the earth by an immortal's temper, which meant nobody was coming for them, ever. I could have ended them. I didn't. I did something the old Ye-Yu, the real one, the boy who dreamed of a restaurant, might even have found a grim justice in. I refined them. Quietly, completely. With an art the codex had been keeping warm in the back of my head for exactly this, down past mere blood, down past cursing and scheming and clever little escape attempts, down to something that would never again do any of those things. Mindless, obedient, tireless, emptied out of everything but the work. My brewery had staff now, permanent staff with excellent retention and no complaints ever about anything. The 4 men who had arranged a lonely boy's beatings from behind a comfortable curtain for sport for years would spend the rest of a very long existence making the wine that built that same boy's empire, and they would never again have a single thought unkind enough to trouble a soul because they would never again have a single thought at all. I'm aware of how that sounds. I've made my peace with how it sounds, and I made it quickly. You spend 20 years being ground down quietly for someone else's comfort, and I promise you, you develop some very firm opinions about who ought to be the one doing the grinding and how much you owe them once the wheel finally turns. And that's where the first chapter of my second life closes, so let me set it down plainly, the way it deserves. 2 months ago, I woke up in a stranger's dying body on the floor of a golden hall, and the most powerful man in the north looked down at the son he'd left in the cold for 20 years and told him to kneel. And I stood in a cave at the bottom of the world, a poet immortal, a champion, a saint in 10,000 eyes, and a demon god in fact, the man who'd built the richest house in the richest city out of everything they threw away. And the same powerful man had, since then, bowed his own head in front of the whole world and begged me to come home. I'd looked at the top of that proud lowered head and told him to take care of himself, and I meant nothing warmer by it than you'd mean to anyone leaving your shop. They told me to kneel. I made them bow. And then I walked, because the walking was the whole point. That's the answer to the question, if anyone's still asking it. After I left, why did you cry and beg me to come back? Because leaving was the first thing I ever did that they couldn't ignore, and coming back was the one thing I was never going to do. But I'd be lying if I ended it clean, and I promised you I wouldn't lie, because I didn't walk away from that cave with nothing owed. I carried 3 things out that I hadn't earned and couldn't pay back, and they're the reason this isn't over. There's a leaf sealed behind my brow, a fire mulberry divine leaf, a stranger's whole fortune spent to guarantee that on my worst day, someone I've never met will step out of nowhere and save my life. I still thought then that a lonely old drunk had traded it for a few bottles of wine. You know better. You've known for a while. It was my grandfather, dying on his feet, who fought up a road paved with killing arrays against the men who'd broken him, to buy one guarantee of safety for a grandson he wasn't allowed to name, and who asked me, in return, for nothing but a poem the next time we met. I never gave him the poem. I didn't know to. And the clock on him was already running when he walked out my door. And that, of everything in this whole story, is the debt I'd give the demon god body itself back to have paid in time. There's a mother, too, camped at the edge of the region because she couldn't make herself go the last mile north, waiting to hear one word she'll probably never hear. I heard her ask for it. I chose the cold. I'd choose it again. But I heard it, and I carry that too. And anyone who tells you revenge is weightless has never had to keep walking while someone behind them quietly hopes. And there's a world that's noticed me now. An immortal's temper cleared my enemies today. But the Liu clan has an old ancestor who's been waiting to see the moment my protector Bai Xingqian leaves this plane, about a month off, before he comes to collect for the grandson I hollowed out in the arena. He Tianyang is still doing his careful math. Xin Yue is still circling, charmed and dangerous. And Bai Xingqian himself, before he went, told me the truest hard thing anyone had said to me all season, that I couldn't hide behind his robes forever, that a man like me had to go out and stand on his own, or he'd never become the thing he was so obviously meant to be. So that's where I leave it. 6th realm and climbing. A demon and a saint in one skin. A fortune, an army of scholars, a brewery that runs itself, and a shopping list with new items on it. A soul-devouring stone, a dragon's bone, the parts of a bigger plan. The system had only just started to show me. A family in ruins behind me, exactly as I'd built it. A dying old man ahead of me in the dark, still clearing the road, still unthanked. They cried and begged me to come back. I went the other way, toward the north, toward whatever wanted to collect on all this power I'd stolen and earned and stolen again. And for the first time since a Maybach and the rain, I wasn't running from anything. I was walking toward it. Ask me whether I'd do it all the same again, knowing the bill that's coming. I'd pour you a cup first. It's a long answer, and you only get 3.